So Mr. Death Incarnate.
Oh, please, just call me Eric.
Hey, I didn't ask.
Oh,
No, as I was saying, do you know why I called you here?
no, not exactly.
I called you here so we can talk about your problems.
My problems?
Yeah, your problem. I want to get to the bottom of it. Dissect it, Figure out what the complication is.
Well, where exactly do I start?
Start anywhere. Just get going. I need to hear what exactly the issue is going on.
Well, I've always, deep down, I've always wanted to be an immortal shapeshifter for various reasons, but obviously reality is a little bit more
What are you doing?
Excuse me?
I said, what are you doing? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about my problems? Is that not what you...
No, I ain't talking about that dumb shit. You think I'm worried about that? No, I don't care about that shit.
Why you have me here?
We're here to talk about my show. That's why. You see, you've been criticizing my show. You're trying to critique my show. Is that what I'm getting at from here? From you specifically?
Oh, that? Well, yeah. I mean, your show's flawed. I mean, I have a couple of issues.
Yeah, but you're so focused on the negativity. Is that not what you're doing right now?
I mean, not exactly. What I'm doing is just simply pointing out inconsistencies within your writing that, in my opinion, harms the full-on experience, and if anything, can be taken away as a learning experience.
Yeah, but you see, that right there, that is the problem. You think this is about some kind of learning experience? Is that what this is? Like, no. Shut up. Why don't you quit being a critic, huh? Don't be a critic. Be a fan.
I mean...
No. Don't be a critic. Be a fan.
I mean, that's literally what I'm trying to do. I can't be a fan of something entirely if my believability and disbelief is taken completely out of proportion in regards to very bad storytelling. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, your show is not completely flawed, right? There's a lot of episodes that I think you did well with. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's definitely episodes that I like and that I enjoy, but I feel like these two episodes in particular, they just harm the whole experience.
But you see, this attitude, this mindset that you have is what's ruining your experience, don't you think? Because, like, if you look at the views for my show, it's very popular. I got millions upon millions of people watching my show and enjoying it. And yet you're the one outlier of this entire deal. Like, what's the issue in regards to that?
Well, I mean, of course, there's millions of people that watch the show, but that doesn't determine whether a show is good or not.
Actually, as a matter of fact, it actually does, because the ratings say everything. The ratings tell you exactly how things are succeeding and if things are failing.
Yeah, well, the ratings is still based upon experience of individuals' viewpoints, right? And, well, personally, I've always viewed that viewership, it was never the determining factor.
It doesn't matter what you view, okay? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because the matter of fact is that you have a problem with my show when it's perfect. It's pitch perfect, actually. As a matter of fact, you want to talk so much about my show. What's going on with yours?
Well,
I haven't heard anything about it in the past year. And yet you did all this advertising, right? Or, you know what, let's talk about the randomness act. You want to talk about ratings? Ain't nobody watch that shit.
Well, the Randomness Act's not even a real show. Randomness Act was just a concept, that I did for fun, that I created as a means.
I didn't ask.
But you literally did. That's the entire reason why we're sitting here.
No, it's not.
Well, it's stuff like this, to be precise with you, as to what my complication with the show is. I mean, what are we doing here? We're spending a whole, 5-minute sequence in an intro scene that's literally exactly like a scene from the show, to be specific. Like, is this what, if this is what people can watch for 20-30 minutes out in, I'm pretty sure they could watch this commentary.
But you see, your insinuation of making that commentary video is the issue. There's no need to make it.
There's definitely a need to make it. I mean, who else is gonna fucking point out the problems? I mean, if I don't point out the conflicts of your show, how are you going to improve when you make your next show? What was it, like Gangster Puppets or something? My mindset towards this is that if a show is well received, then I'm allowed to like or dislike whatever I watch. And regardless of my opinion on something, if there is factual evidence to base upon to showcase the flaws in your writing, that means that you... But you see, listen to me for a second. That means that you have to work on those flaws if you want to keep your viewership. You're worried about you're thinking about the viewership currently, but what about the viewership in the future for your next show when people can see that this episode or this specific moment within this story was completely flopped? Then what? Then nobody's going to trust you as a storyteller going forward. I mean, look how many times it happened to several other people in the past year, to be specific.
I really tried. I'm really trying,
I would hope that you're trying. I mean, what else are we doing here then?
Yeah, I really tried to have a civil conversation with you about this. But you just don't get it, do you?
What exactly don't I get?
Just stop. Don't be a critic. Be a fan. And if you can't be a fan, just stop watching. You can go fuck off for all I care.
Is that how you feel?
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Okay. I'll go fuck off. Okay. I know what I have to do now.
Don't do it. I see you thinking about it. Don't even consider it. Just be a fan. Just stop doing this. No. Just enjoy the ride that I'm going to take you on. Don't.
How you doing, peeps? Welcome to 2026. It's been a strange year so far. A lot of things going on behind the scenes, but you know what? I got a video idea in mind, so I decided that today I'm gonna spend my free day to work on it. And exactly what that video is in mind is that I was going to talk about the worst episodes of the Amazing Digital Circus. Now, the reason why is because around the corner of when this video is coming out, it should be episode 8 dropping out.
Wrong.
The reason why I want to talk about the worst episodes of the Amazing Digital Circus is because I don't want to overfill my eventual review of the show. You see, at some point in time when the show is done, so when like the 9th episode comes out, I plan on reviewing the show. The thing is that when I review the show, I don't want to spend like 3 to 4 hours talking about the Amazing Digital Circus when I could just be spending maybe an hour. And the reason why it would have taken 3 to 4 hours is because I would have talked about each individual episode. And the reason why that would have been problematic is because, as you can see, the video length here in this video, it's going to be a long talk. And so I thought that making this its own video now before I eventually review the show would be better off. And I think I'm able to talk about these episodes now because we've gotten enough development with episode 6 and episode 7 for me to articulate my thoughts on how I feel regarding episode 4 and episode 5, which I believe to be the 2 worst episodes of the Amazing Digital Circus by a landslide. I don't know what happened these 2 episodes. I don't know what Gooseworx was cooking, but clearly it was not good. It was really bad. And I wanted to say all my thoughts on it. I wanted to talk about it, talk about the flaws of these episodes and why I think it really harms the eventual ending of what we are going to get for Digital Circus because of these 2 episodes, and also what I think could have been done with these episodes, because the beautiful thing about hindsight is being able to know what can and can't work with the story. And the beautiful thing about these 2 episodes in particular is that Gooseworx actually introduced the stories and plot lines that would have made these episodes significantly better, a million times better. The problem is that Gooseworx didn't actually pursue these ideas, and so what we ended up getting was actually much worse than what it could have been. The reason why I say episodes 4 and 5 are really bad, well, specifically, let me talk about episode 4 first. The reason why I say episode 4 is really bad is because it's a story that's supposed to be the segue from the first part of what Digital Circus is to the next part. It is the beginning of Arc 2, which Arc 2 was supposed to focus on Caine and the submission box, the opposing personalities of Jax and Ragatha, and it was supposed to focus on Gangle's depression. The problem is if you didn't really pay much attention to that detail, you wouldn't have known that this was really an arc because of how poorly this episode was executed. The poor execution of this episode leaves for all the storylines that were supposed to be set up in this episode going forward into episode 5, and maybe even into episode 6 as well, was so poorly done and not paid off. Almost all of the storylines that were supposed to get paid off in this episode or get set up were not. And everything that was set up never got the payoff that it was supposed to get in the later episodes. So it makes me wonder what the hell happened with Fast Food Masquerade. And then in the case of Untitled, the issue with Untitled is that it feels like it's a waste of time. It's a complete filler episode with exposition dumps, and it doesn't actually develop the characters in any meaningful way other than maybe one or two little sequences that may have indicated to something to come. But those things don't really mean much in the grand scheme of things with the context of hindsight because of how poorly it was executed. Which is ironic because Gooseworx has stated before that one of the reasons why he doesn't want to continue to make various different seasons or episodes of the Digital Circus is because he feels like it's going to be too much filler, which is ironic because episode 5 is purely the definition of filler. And arguably, episode 4 is too because of how poorly executed the stories are and how it amounted to eventually nothing. So I just find stuff like that ironic when a show creator will say like, well, the reason why we're not doing this, the reason why we're not exploring the fun, different adventures and ideas that we introduced in episode 5 is because we didn't want to make filler episodes that waste your time. And then those very episodes are the episodes that waste your time. So, I always find stuff like that ironic or funny. In general, I also find just like the idea that the show is supposed to be character driven to be contradictory, because at the same time, Goose has stated before that this show has a purpose and has a story. So if you've never heard my discussions regarding my viewpoints towards a purpose-driven story and a character moment story, or as you may know to be a serialized story and an episodic story, is that I've always said that you need to know what kind of story you are making from the get-go and make that story. Because when you try to make it one thing and then you change it in the middle of the road, then people will go back and look at the things that you made prior and go, why would you do that?
Where's the giant, Mansley?
For example, the story was the main focal point of the first couple of episodes. It was the story of Pomni being in the circus itself, and all the different attributes and aspects of the circus. And then when we get to these two episodes 4 and 5, the story takes a complete backseat to the so-called character development. And I say so-called character development because, as you will see when I go through these episodes, there is really no character development, or it's just a very contradictory character development that I can't even call it character development. And Goose has stated that his focus is more towards the characters than the actual story, which I always thought was a problem when I saw that, and I was like, why would you do that? Because I don't know if you people notice, but I think people should start to learn this, or at least figure this out. But when it comes to storytelling and character development are not mutually exclusive, which means that you do not have to separate the two. You can make a good story at the same time whilst you are developing your characters out. You don't have to waste our time with a meaningless episode where the characters don't do much just because you want to do character development, because then that would be the pure definition of a filler. If you don't know, a filler is essentially when you just have an episode that's just focused on the characters doing whatever the fuck, but the story doesn't get progressed. That is literally a filler. It fills up the episode slots when you have nothing to do with your characters except for just making them bond for a bit other than telling the story. To me, a story, when you're making a story-driven tale and it's like about the purpose of the story, which in this case, the purpose of the Amazing Digital Circus is supposed to be about finding meaning in a stagnant life, at least what Gooseworx states anyway. It's very important that you have that storyline be fulfilled throughout, because when you have episodes like episode 4, for example, where the entire episode is a contradiction to that very purpose and plot, then when we go back to the plot later on and I'm supposed to care about stuff like when the characters desperately want to escape the circus, now I'm sitting here wondering to myself, why would you want to escape the circus when in this episode you got exactly what you guys asked for and you didn't end up liking it? So like, I don't know. It's just a very contradictory show in that manner, and I don't like that fact. And I think that's going to be a very big flaw going forward with however episode 8 and episode 9 go. Because if episode 8 and episode 9 really want you to take the story seriously, then I gotta look back at like these episodes and think to myself, why did we waste our time doing this then? You know, like when I made my previous video of booking the Amazing Digital Circus, one of the funniest comments that I saw was when Glitch posted the image of the exit door at the beach. And the top comment, the first comment, was somebody saying like, are we finally going back to this plot line? I had a good laugh when I saw that comment because it's so true. It's like, why the hell did we put the story on the back burner when the story was the driving force of the first episode? The first episode's driving force was being in the circus, and then episodes 2 and 3 followed upon that very story. So why did we suddenly decide to stop that to do filler character development? Just because what? You wanted to make character development stories, but you made them mutually exclusive? I don't understand. That, to me, that doesn't make sense to me, especially for when you say that you don't want to make filler episodes, despite the fact that you're making filler episodes. So it makes me wonder why we can't get a season 2. It makes me wonder why we couldn't get more adventures from the characters when we could definitely develop their characters whilst having entertaining adventures, which is another problem that I have with episodes 4 and 5. They're just boring. And the reason why they're boring is because nothing about those adventures make you intrigued, make you interested in actually wanting to watch those episodes in particular. So with episode 5, the characters just go through random different events where they're just, I guess, doing stuff and trying to like see what the events are, and then sometimes they'll skip it, sometimes they'll just talk, sit. But the thing is that nothing is getting developed. Like when they're talking to each other about this stuff, you can see them talking to each other about the stuff in episodes where the adventure is actually entertaining. So I don't know why we have to just waste our time with them just sitting around talking unless you want to make that like the theme of the episode. Like if the entire theme of the episode would have been like just the bar and they all have to sit at a bar and just try to poke at each other's insecurities and inner turmoils, then maybe that would have made for a better episode than actually just going through all these different adventures doing a whole lot of nothing. And then with the case with episode 4 to me is absolutely egregious because it's such a contradiction of what it's supposed to be. You have a show that's purpose of the show is supposed to focus on finding meaning in a stagnant life. And then the entire episode of episode 4 is the complete opposite of that, which is just reestablishing how boring and how terrible 9-to-5 job is, which goes completely against what the point of the show is supposed to be. You would think that a well-written show in a situation like this where it has to present like a job, like a 9-to-5, would find a way to actually make you find the nuance and intricacies that would actually make you enjoy working, or at least find some kind of form of happiness while working, so that way you don't have to feel like when you get off the shift you want to kill yourself at the end of it. No, the episode instead just has these characters working a 9-to-5 for a meaningless point, and then at the end of it nothing gets accomplished, especially with our main character of that episode, which I will get into the discussion of once I get to episode 4. But to me, it never made sense why the show would do that. It's the equivalent of watching your coworkers work. Like, what's the difference? Let me ask you a question. What is the difference between you working your 9-to-5 and watching your coworkers work versus watching fictional characters work that same 9-to-5? What's the difference? If the difference is that their stories are being developed, then I have to ask you what stories got developed that episode. Because when I get into each of the characters regarding that episode, you will see that each of the so-called stories that are getting developed for the characters equivalent to nothing at the end of it. Don't get paid off, or the payoff is so poorly executed that it's not even worth the trouble. Like, to me, I would personally think that actually doing the job would be more entertaining than sitting around watching other people do the job. It's the equivalent of someone watching other people play video games when you can also play video games. It's like, yes, you can watch other people play video games, but it's probably because it's entertaining when they play the video games, because you're watching them react to the actual game in question. With episode 4, you're not watching these characters actually react to having a good time working the job. They're just working the job, being miserable, and then that's the end of the episode. And then you have to eventually do the exact same thing. Like, imagine you come home from work and then you watch this piece of shit for 20 minutes, and then tomorrow you got to do the same thing that they just did. It's like, does that make the episode good just because it's relatable? To me, relatability does not automatically mean good. Relatability is just something that you can understand. But just because you understand something doesn't mean that you automatically agree with it. To me, when I understand the pains and the struggles of what working a 9-to-5 would be like for somebody that's going through like a stressful time, it doesn't make this episode good, you know, because the characters don't get developed. The storyline is non-existent, and every storyline that was introduced never gets paid off. That's the biggest flaw about episode 4. But you don't have to take my word for it right now, because I'm about to go into both episodes 4 and 5, and I'm about to dissect these sons of bitches and showcase to you why these episodes are truly really awful, and why I think these episodes can really damage and harm the end of the story. Because to me, I value the ending and the middle of a story more than its beginning. I can forgive a show starting rough, but if the middle, where everything is supposed to have the most like development, is messy, or its conclusion and how it all wraps up is messy, it ruins the experience for me. That's why I've always had a hard time enjoying shows over movies, because I know when I watch a movie, I sit there for 90 minutes and I'm gonna get a conclusion by the end of the movie. And what that conclusion is gonna wrap up the story. And if it's good or if it's bad, I'll know by watching it and seeing that it's good or bad. But in the case of a show, you have to wait until the show actually finishes before actually making a true opinion in regards to whether something is good or bad. So I know that for some people are going to ask me, like, then why are you reviewing the episode 4 and 5 and claiming that they're bad right now? The reason why is because I watched up until episode 6 and 7.
Don't get any ideas.
And now, having watched episodes 6 and 7, I know where the storylines of 4 and 5 specifically were leading to or have led to, so I can make a good conclusion as to what those episodes roundabout are, as compared to if I would just watch them for the first time and then had to wait. You know, it would be like, well, you gotta wait and see. But in this case, you know, I waited and I saw, and I see how the payoffs didn't equate to anything. Now, granted, maybe somehow magically, I don't know how they would probably do this, somehow episode 8 and 9 magically fixes episode 4 and 5 somehow by like making them meaningful. To me, I don't see how that can be done, because 4 and 5 are so sloppy and messy in execution that it's not gonna fix what ends up getting concluded. Like, yes, can you somehow make these characters meaningful again, or the storyline between them and the conflict of the circus meaningful again? Yes. Like, to me, with episode 7 specifically, I felt like episode 7 was both the best and the worst thing that the show could have done. I said that before. Because, one, it was the best thing because it showcased that Gooseworx can in fact still make a good story, to me, which is great, and can indeed still pay off these characters in a really strong light if done properly going forward in these next 2 episodes. But I said it was also the worst thing that happened in the show, because now, with the hindsight of knowing where the direction of arc 3 is going, it makes me look back at arc 2, it makes me look back at these specific 2 episodes, 4 and 5, and think, why did we do that? You know, why did we waste our time with that? Or why was it so poorly executed to the point where now it makes the storyline going into episodes 8 and 9 feel not as impactful as it would have been if these 2 episodes specifically were done right, as a back-to-back, you know, done right, set up episode 6 perfectly, pays off episode 6 perfectly, and then you go into episode 7 and it's like even bigger of a heartbreak. So I'm gonna get into all the details regarding that now. So let's start with Fast Food Masquerade. Now, I'm not gonna jump straight into the big flaws of Fast Food Masquerade. In fact, I want to do this a little bit differently. I want it to build up. I want to build up the flaws. So I'm going to start from the most minuscule of problems going into this episode to then building into the bigger problems regarding this episode. We're going to talk about each individual character, and then once I go through each individual character, I'll talk about the big storylines that were supposed to be executed within this episode. And then once we go through all the flaws and all the conflicts of why I really think this episode in particular is the worst episode of the whole series by a landslide, then I can do my little how I would book at the end of it and showcase to you how I thought this episode could have definitely been booked way better, 100% better, while still utilizing the episode's plots that they introduced. So the first character I want to talk about with Fast Food Masquerade is Pomni. Now, Pomni, of course, as you know, is the main character and the main lead of the Amazing Digital Circus. But you would be forgiven for forgetting that, because for some reason in episode 4 and even episode 5 to a degree, she takes a back seat, like a very heavy back seat. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 all had Pomni as a very prominent character in a very prominent role within the story. She seemingly always gets split up from the main adventures to go on a little side quest regarding her insecurities about being in the circus and how it's causing her a lot of emotional damage. But in this episode, for some reason, Pomni is not very prevalent, or at least is not in the main driving story of the character developments of this episode. Now, you would think that she is, because she does have 1 or 2 scenes with Gangle later in the episode, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, if you don't know, each episode allegedly is supposed to be a character-based episode for one of the characters in the show. So, episode 1 was kind of like the introduction, 2 was about Pomni, 3 was about Caine and Zooble, 4 Gangle, 5 Ragatha, 6 Jax, 7 allegedly Caine, and then whatever the hell 8 and 9 are going to be about. More ensemble, I'm assuming. But a common theme that you'll notice regarding the character-based episodes is that even though the character is more front and center in regards to which character it's focusing on, it never removes Pomni from the equation. Pomni is always very tied to the character of whoever is the main focus of the episode. Like, for example, the previous episode, episode 3, when Caine was one of the main focuses of the episode, Pomni was right there next to him, going on the journey and learning his story alongside of him. Whereas on the other case, Zooble was just kind of there with Caine, which, let me tell you now, I think you already know. I think Zooble is the most useless character in the entire show. I don't see what Zooble is going to offer to the rest of the story, because she really doesn't do anything. Her role in the story offers much of nothing, and a lot, if not all, of her character defining traits can be within other characters, more so specifically within Pomni's character. I mean, from the likes of the body dysmorphia, that could have been Pomni's gimmick because she is insecure about being small or being treated like a child, like she can't take care of herself. You have the storyline with hating Caine, which Pomni could have easily had that storyline regarding to hating Caine, especially regards to just Caine starting to feel insecure about the characters not liking his adventures. Like, why now, when Pomni shows up, out of all times, is Caine starting to feel this way? Like, why not before Pomni showed up? Like, when Zooble was around? So why are we having a therapy session with Caine and Zooble, despite the fact that Zooble was already in the circus, and not Pomni and Caine? Where that would have made more sense, because Caine is trying to figure out what the newcomer's issue is and trying to figure out what Pomni's complications are, and, you know, trying to reach to her and see, you know, what's the issues going on with you, Pomni? And it could have been perfect, you know, and it sets up why Pomni may have been the one to start skipping out on adventures, or just been not very invested in Caine's adventures, and that could have been the storyline. And then in regards to the relationship with Gangle, in regards to Zooble's character, well, Zooble didn't ever have to actually get into a relationship with Gangle, and I know what you're going to say. Well, actually, technically, there's no relationships in the show. Well, technically, our show creator has claimed that he loves to lie for fun, so no, I'm not going to take that at face value. But you're gonna take the other things at face value, like the purpose of the show? yes, I'm going to take the purpose of the show at face value because the purpose of the show is the purpose of the show. If the show doesn't have a purpose, you just wasted my time, and I'm never going to trust any fucking show you make going forward or any piece of literature that you make going forward. That's how the market works. You can't lie to your customers. But yeah, going back onto the point of Zooble and the relationship thing, Zooble never had to be in a relationship, and Gangle never had to be tied to Zooble's ass for the rest of the fucking story, because Gangle could have been more prominent and focused on regarding the trio between Jax, Ragatha, and Pomni, because Gangle has more to do with Jax, Ragatha, and Pomni. Jax is bullying her. Ragatha was who she originally confided in the most, but then had a falling out in this episode, but you would be forgiven to not know that because it's so poorly done, which I will get into. And then with Pomni, you could have formed a new friendship between Gangle and Pomni, with Pomni trying to reach out to Gangle in this episode, which she does, and then it amounts to literally nothing. So I don't understand why Zooble has to be a character in the story when everything about Zooble can be in our main character of Pomni. But what we ended up getting with Pomni in this episode is that Pomni ends up running the counter. That's all she does throughout the episode. And so what she ends up doing is that she encounters Gummy Goo. And then she has this weird, strange interaction with Gummy Goo where she's trying to, I guess, be friendly, but is being the weirdo. And then finally comes to the acceptance that Gummy Goo is not the same Gummy Goo as before. The issue about this scene is that it feels out of place. It doesn't feel like it works in the storyline that which we were building. Because in the previous 2 episodes, Pomni's character had been paid off in regards to her insecurities regarding like how she feels towards the other people. She had befriended Ragatha. She had confided in Kinger. So I don't understand why she feels the need to still try to be friends with Gummy Goo. Like, you could have had this as a small little interaction, be like, oh my god, it's Gummy Goo. Do you remember me? You know, try to see if he knows. And then when it was revealed, you know, then she could be like, oh, he doesn't know. That's unfortunate. You know, it could be like a small sad moment, but the way that it's drawn out and it's dragged out to be this very awkward, weird tension scene between them, it just feels so out of place, considering that Pomni had already kind of like vented out her frustrations, had already come to the realization that some of the people here, like a Ragatha or like a Kinger, would be there to protect her and save her if she was going down the road of abstraction. So I don't understand why Pomni had to go through this insecurity regarding Gummy Goo again, when it could have just been like a one-off scene. The only explanation that I have for this is that it's just fan service, just to have, you know, Gummy Goo and Pomni interact one more time. But to me, over the coming years, I've learned that fan service just doesn't do it unless the story is good. You know, you can't have mutually exclusive fan service. The biggest example of this would be like in Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame was a story that was completely based upon fan service. Now, initially, when you first watch it, it might seem amazing, like, oh wow, Endgame was so amazing. But then when you go back and you look at all the story flaws, you realize that the fan service was just that. It was just to please us as an audience by just paying off things that we thought was cool or thought would be cool, but without actually doing the proper storytelling to do it. And so in this case, I feel like it's a similar case where I guess Goose was just banking on people liking seeing Gummy Goo again and seeing Pomni interact with Gummy Goo again, that would take up enough screen time for Pomni in the episode that you wouldn't realize that Pomni doesn't really have much of anything to do in the actual episode. Because the other part of what Pomni ends up doing in the episode is that she tries to reach out to Gangle, and at first she is a little bit unsuccessful in doing so, but then on the second attempt she seems to reach through to Gangle and is like, you know what, I'll close out for the day, you take off, and you know, everything seems nice and dandy, except for the fact that Gangle runs into oncoming traffic. And for some reason, I don't know why, for some reason, the story continues, and then we go back to the circus, and Pomni doesn't even once go to Gangle when she's by herself. You would think that after trying to reach out to Gangle and trying to be her friend, you know, see what's her complication, you know, taking Kinger's advice and the lesson that he taught her, that, you know, the worst thing that you could do is make someone feel like they're not appreciated, they're, you know, not cared about. And yet, in the moment where Gangle really needed somebody to confide in her when she was all by herself drawing anime, Pomni's not there. Pomni doesn't go over and is like, hey, Gangle, what happened? And, you know, the whole semi-truck thing never gets brought up once, which I think is weird enough regarding Pomni not reaching out, but then it's even worse with a certain other character. You know who it is by this point. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. But I feel like Pomni's character could have had more to do if she had the character that she confided in the most from the previous episode, which is Kinger. But you'd be forgiven for not knowing that, because for some reason, Kinger was sat out this episode for, I guess, a gag, where Kinger's like, you know, I'll sit out, Zooble gets the goal in, and it's supposed to be like, I suppose, funny gag. But on a storytelling perspective, it makes no sense, especially considering the previous episode was Kinger's big episode. Now, I want you to understand, when you're writing a story and you hit gold, right? One of your characters sparks and everybody's like, holy shit, this character's awesome, this character's cool, and they are white hot. When you make the next piece of that story and that character is not on display or is not showcased at all, yeah, don't be surprised when people are going to be frustrated over that fact. It's the equivalent of wrestling, right? If you have Stone Cold Steve Austin, he just won the WWF Championship. He did it! Austin won the WWF Championship! And then the next week, the next week on Raw, you want to see what Stone Cold's going to say. You want to see what Stone Cold's going to do. He's the new champ. He's running the block. You know, what's he going to do? And then he doesn't show up. And it's like, what the fuck? Where is Stone Cold? Why is he not here? It's the equivalent of that, because like he's white hot, so you leave him off TV. That's your big idea. It's like what happened with R-Truth last year. R-Truth became Ron Killings. He was white hot. Everybody's like, Ron Killings is the guy. You know, like he cut his dreads. He's like, I ain't playing no more. And then he sat out in catering for a whole month, I think. And it's like, why would you do that with your character? And the same thing here. Why would Kinger be sat out for this episode? Is it because you know that Kinger would have, you know, solved or resolved the conflict of Gangle? So you thought, okay, so we need to make sure that the conflict with Gangle doesn't get resolved right away. So let's have Kinger sit out instead of actually finding a clever, creative way to have Kinger not immediately reach out to Gangle. And to me, it's like, why? You could have found a very simple way to incorporate Kinger into this episode that doesn't automatically resolve Gangle's conflicts or Ragatha's conflicts. Like, there was a way to do it, and I'm going to tell you the way you could have done it later. So I don't know how you missed out on such a big opportunity when you have a character that's white hot like that and you need to like display them. You just showcased that this character has more than he lets on, and then you sit him out for this episode and then continue to sit him out and make him meaningless going into the next episode too, which is the worst part about it. Because now this character of Kinger, what's the point of him being here? If we just had the big moment with him, like revealing that he knows more than he lets on regarding the light and the darkness, like he can think more clearly in the darkness. He doesn't have this dementia like he does in the light. But now we're gonna sit out his character. We're gonna put him as a background again. And conveniently enough, which is ironic enough, the character that is the main focal point of this episode, which I feel like they give way too much of a push this episode, which is Gangle, then becomes irrelevant again in the next couple of episodes. So it's like, what is this inconsistent booking? You have a character, it's completely focused on them, they're the main like focal point of the episode, but then when it comes to the next episode, you completely relegate them to the background and don't develop them characters. And you would think for a show that's all about character development, that every episode, each of the characters would get character development, regardless. You know, like some characters you can hold off on a little bit, like a Kinger, showcase little signs that he knows more than he lets on, and then have the big reveal, and then use him going forward. But what actually happened in the show is that Kinger had his big episode in episode 3, and then he was relegated to not being in episode 4. And it makes no sense. It feels like a cop-out from using a white-hot character from actually being in the episode because he knows so much. I don't know. To me, that's just bad writing. That's just bad storytelling. If you don't know what to do with the white hot character that you have in an episode because you know he's gonna solve something, then you gotta rework your episode. If Kinger was gonna resolve, in your mind, was gonna resolve the Gangle conflict or the Ragatha conflict right away, then rework your episode to make it work. You can't just remove the character and be like, okay, that's a job well done. Like you did the same cop out with Zooble in episode 2 because Zooble's render was too big for the actual adventure. So we have to remove Zooble from the adventure. But at least with Zooble's removal, you had a storyline reason why Zooble wouldn't be there, because Zooble's trying to skip out on Caine's adventure. She doesn't care. But here, there is no storyline reason. It's just Kinger's gonna sit out because he's a little bit stupid and he's like, I'll fit out for Zooble as a replacement to solve the Zooble problem. And then he's out, and then the adventure that he actually goes on, we never get the side plot of. Even though in episode 3, we got the side plot of Zooble and Caine talking, so why didn't we get the side plot of Caine and Kinger? I don't understand, but because this is what I heard. Gooseworx said that it would make the joke funnier. It was a joke? So all of this, Kinger being left out of the episode, was a gag, but you just wasted perfect character development opportunity. You just wasted the potential of the story being built between Kinger and Pomni, between Kinger and the rest of the characters. You are having certain characters not interact with each other, which undermines the character development. For a show that's all about character development, there is a lot of characters that barely interact with each other. Have you really seen Kinger truly interact with Gangle like that, or a Zooble like that? Like, he had the one instance where he talked with Gangle in the first episode, but that was it. Kinger and Gangle don't really interact at all in the show, or like encounter each other that much. Kinger was like, oh, I'm gonna go get your mask in episode 3, and that was it. They don't actually ever have a meaningful conversation, have good banter, have good interactions, but that's what you need for a show that's allegedly supposed to be all about character development. You need to develop your characters. If certain characters are not meshing at all, then we're gonna point that out as a flaw, because that's not character development. If you can't develop the characters and their relationship, how am I supposed to feel for them when they go through genuine conflicts later? Like, I can't feel for them if they never had anything to begin with. Like, if they never had a relationship. Like, I'm supposed to feel for a relationship that's non-existent, which, oh boy, I can't wait to talk about Pomni and Jax later. That's gonna be the big conversation later in episode 5. But for right now, like that, I don't understand why you would leave Kinger out of this episode when Kinger would have provided a perfect story tool for Pomni to actually be relevant in the episode. I mean, first of all, with the Gummy Goo thing, if Pomni was affected or felt like some kind of way about Gummy Goo not remembering her, not knowing about her, you could have had Kinger come for Pomni and be like, it's all right, Pomni, you have us, we can still hang out. If you wanna cook some patties together, I got a couple of tricks up my sleeve. You could have had Kinger doing a lot of shit, man. I don't understand why you don't have the character that is white hot doing something in the episode. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then, like, with later on in the story, as you will come to see, like, with the whole Gangle thing, it's like, Pomni never comments on Gangle. To me, that's a cheap cop-out of character development right there. Because, like, let's say we actually had character development there. What does Pomni think about the fact that Gangle just tried to kill herself? Because she was at the counter looking out at the street where Gangle ran off to, and she would have most likely have seen Gangle got hit by a fucking semi-truck. So why did we never get a follow-up on that? Like, why did we never see, like, Pomni's reaction or how she felt about seeing Gangle get hit? And, she could have been, like, a little bit hurt by that because she thought that she helped Gangle, but then it didn't actually work, and she could have confided in Kinger about that. Like, oh, Kinger, I tried to take your advice, I tried to help Gangle, but she didn't take my hand. And you could have had Kinger giving us another life lesson to round about the theme of this episode and be like, some people, they need to find themselves first before you can really reach out and help them. So you gotta give Gangle some time. In time, I'm sure, she'll offer her hand out, and then you can help her again. You could have had something like that. Why just completely remove Kinger altogether and then completely negate whatever character development that Pomni could have gotten in the episode? Pomni is your main lead. She should be the focal point of what happens in this episode, and the fact that she's not begs into question why she's the main character. Why is this our main character if our main character is not going to drive us through the story? To which she did just fine in episodes 1, 2, and 3, but for some reason here, it's all about Gangle, but we don't actually progress discuss anything with Gangle, which I will get into about. But first, I want to talk about Ragatha first. Now, apparently, Ragatha in this episode is very prevalent to Gangle's storyline. But you would be forgiven for not knowing that, because Ragatha, what she does in this episode, equivalates to essentially nothing. And everything in regards to what she does with Gangle is so poorly done. So first of all, the first thing we get is Ragatha and Pomni bonding. Or at least, that's what I would be saying if it wasn't for a certain scene. But I'll get to that. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But after that, Ragatha then eventually gets stupid sauce in her eye. And I forgot to mention, but at the beginning of the episode, Ragatha was trying to teach Gangle how to play softball. Jax ends up accidentally breaking her mask, and then she yells at Jax thinking that it was intentional. And then when we get to the stupid sauce thing, and she gets the stupid sauce, we see a glimpse into Ragatha's mind where she sees Gangle as being corrupted by this happy mask. And Ragatha can see how the happy mask could turn Gangle out to be. And honestly, it could have worked really well had they actually play into the fact that Gangle was going to become more problematic in the episode. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself now, aren't I? But in regards to what Ragatha actually ends up doing is that she just ends up being drunk and high for the entire episode, just kind of like zoned out, occasionally giving glimpses into her past here and there. Like she talks about her horses, she talks about wanting to be loved, wanting to have a good mother figure, you know, nice little teases here and there. The thing is that all those teases, I know, end up not resulting in a good execution. So looking back on it now is not good. It leads to nothing. It's kind of a waste of time, if anything. And in regards to what ends up happening to Ragatha at the very end of the episode, which she still is drunk or high, whatever the hell, is that she makes a passing comment to Gangle because Gangle is like telling her, hey, you need to get back to work. And Ragatha's like, no offense, man, but you're kind of annoying with that mask on. And then for some reason, and I still don't know why, Gangle takes it so personally. Like so personally. She got called annoying. And the reason why I don't understand why Gangle took it so hard is because of how poorly the story was building. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself now, aren't I? Now, in regards to Ragatha, this was supposed to be her setup to her big episode in episode 5. Except for the fact that it wasn't her big episode because she was barely utilized in the episode that's supposed to be about her. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself now, aren't I? So let's get to the actual main focus of this episode then, shall I? Gangle! Hey, it's Gangle. Actually, let's talk about Zooble first. Because Zooble is very quintessential to Gangle's plot in this episode too, or at least that's what you're supposed to believe. But then when you go to actually rewatch it and think about it, you think to yourself, why did Zooble make all the decisions that Zooble made? Because it makes no sense. So to start off in regards to Zooble tries to help out Gangle, give her the plastic happy mask, which is supposedly made her feel better. You know, Zooble's like, I'm glad I can help a friend out. And then Zooble obviously is trying to not go on Caine's adventure, except that it's not Caine's adventure, it's a submitted adventure. Yet Zooble is still like, nah, I ain't trying to be doing this stuff, but is forced to go on the adventure anyway. And throughout this entire adventure, and I swear, you can go back, watch every scene, the entire adventure, Zooble is bothered by the fact that she's working this job. Clearly bothered, clearly irritated, and she is not having a good time. Every time someone asks her about doing something, she's like, I'm only doing it just because Caine is going to threaten to punish me or something like that. And then by the end of the episode, whatever Zooble was doing within the actual adventure amounts to nothing, right? So you know that. You know that Zooble was bothered. She was only doing it because Caine forced her to, and that was the equivalent to what she learned from that adventure. Then when you go into episode 5, she apparently claims, alongside Pomni, that she actually enjoyed the adventure.
I honestly didn't hate the last one we did with it. It was kind of refreshing doing something grounded in reality.
What are you talking about?
Now, remember what I said earlier about the purpose of the show and how the purpose of the show is supposed to find meaning in a stagnant life? And you would think that in this episode, in episode 4, that the point of this episode would have been to focus on the characters finding some kind of joy or enjoyment and having fun, doing something that they used to think was meaningless, like working a 9 to 5. So while working the 9 to 5, they can find something to do that actually entertains them, makes them feel happy, makes them enjoy the normal life again, especially a character like Pomni, who used to be an accountant. And honestly, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I'm pretty sure the entire reason that she got into the circus was because she tried to escape the life of being an accountant and goes on mild thrills of going to abandoned buildings.
I was an accountant for a supermarket chain. I sometimes got bored of things, and I would seek out mild thrills, like exploring abandoned buildings.
So if this was supposed to play on to her theme, Zooble, the same thing, I think. Zooble is the exact same thing. So if this was supposed to play on that, it could have showed that both Pomni and Zooble should have actually had an entertaining, fun time whilst doing the actual 9 to 5, having a good time, working, feeling like they finally get to enjoy a normal life again. But like I showcased to you, Zooble did not enjoy the adventure. Not one time in this adventure did Zooble ever say that she actually liked doing the adventure. In fact, she actually said she didn't like it. She's only doing it because Caine forced her to.
So you're just, actually doing the job.
Yeah, I don't want Caine to punish me.
And at no point in the time did you ever see that Pomni actually enjoyed the adventure either. She even says at the very end of the episode,
What a weird day.
but the story, because it has to try and fulfill the purpose of the show, waits till the next episode to make these two characters who clearly did not enjoy their time in the adventure be like, yeah, you know what, I actually kind of enjoyed it. What are you talking about? If these characters actually were supposed to enjoy it and find meaning in a stagnant life and find purpose in that actual job that they did, you would have had it in the episode. Listen, I'm not going to be gaslit into believing that these characters actually cared when you showcase to me that they don't. And now all of a sudden, because they said that they did, it means that they actually did? No. I've been doing the storytelling thing long enough to know when I'm being gaslit to believe something that's not actually true. Especially for the episode that its entire premise was to focus and showcase to you how terrible the 9 to 5 was. Now, all of a sudden, so you want me to go through this episode, see how bad the 9 to 5 life is, and then all of a sudden, next episode, you want me to think that it's better than the circus, it's better than Caine's adventure? Why? You never showed me a reason why I should think that this was better than Caine's adventure, which goes into a big problem that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But here, with Zooble's character, I feel like this would have been the perfect opportunity to showcase that. Zooble did not want to go on this Spudsies adventure. So showcasing at the end of the episode that she actually somewhat enjoyed it could have been very vital, not only to the purpose of the story, but also to her character development. Because like I said earlier, Zooble is the most useless and meaningless character in the entire show. I mean, Zooble barely has any character arcs. The only so-called character arc that she has is getting into a relationship with Gangle. And even that is poorly done, because by the end of this episode, the way that they resolve the Gangle conflict is so poorly executed that it makes me wonder, how are these two characters even truly friends, dude? How? If you want, let's talk about Gangle now. So what does Gangle actually do in the episode? So Gangle becomes the manager, is bossing people around allegedly, and makes some rules, makes some ground rules, starts to do whatever manager tasks that she ends up doing, and then clearly at the very end of it had a bad time, went into oncoming traffic, clearly feels like she pushed everybody away, and it results in whatever the hell the scene with Zooble and Gangle happens. So first of all, my first question that I have to you is, why, when Gangle was actually being depressed throughout the episode, did Zooble never actually reach out to Gangle and figure out, what's wrong? You would think that Zooble, being the one who gave Gangle the happy mask, would have been trying to reach out to Gangle, not Pomni, and be like, hey, what happened? Is everything all right? You clearly seem sad about, managing. You know that one scene where Zooble's in the doorway and Gangle is kind of like sad to herself? Why did Zooble not do anything there? Why did Zooble just be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take Ragatha home? Because apparently to Zooble, Ragatha is the bigger priority. But even that, oh boy, even that is a contradiction, because my fucking god, the fucking deep fryer fryer scene. Oh, the deep fryer scene. Oh, I'm gonna get into it. I gotta hold it off for just a little bit longer, but I will get into that. But later on in the episode, Zooble comes over, tries to figure out why Gangle's all by herself, alone. Gangle tells her that the mask didn't work. I feel like I pushed everybody away. Everything went wrong. And you wanna know what ended up happening? Do you think Zooble apologized for being the reason of why Gangle had the happy mask? Do you think Zooble talked about how, she doesn't really need the comedy mask in order to truly be her true self? Just like how they did in episode 6 where they had that random scene in the middle of the episode that made absolutely no sense because for some reason we needed that scene there and not here where it actually would have made sense. Because why would we stop in the middle of a gun shootout, have this therapy talk scene, just because for some reason in the middle of it, Gangle's just like, how do I love the worst version of myself? Like, dude, we're in the middle of a gun shootout. Why the hell are you talking to me now? Why not after? Why not before the fact? Why are we having this scene in a random episode like episode 6 where it doesn't make sense why it would be there? I don't know. And it all stems from this episode in particular. Because the grand resolution of this episode is that Zooble says, no, you didn't really hurt anybody. I didn't feel offended. You know what? Come sit with us. I want to see what you draw. And then Gangle fucking does it.
Look, the new mask was a bust. So what? I'm sure we'll find something that works eventually.
I don't deserve a friend like you.
That's it?
What? What do you mean? So wait a minute. This opens up a can of worms. You know why? Because there was only 2 ways that you could have actually executed the ending of this episode. Either A, you could have had the scene from episode 6 be at the ending of this episode and then resolved Gangle's conflict in this episode. Or B, you could have had Gangle push away Zooble to really emphasize her depression going into the rest of this arc, aka episode 5 and episode 6. But they didn't do either of that. They just resolved the conflict and then for some reason re-established the conflict in a random episode like episode 6 for no reason other than, well, we gotta showcase that Jax's philosophy is wrong, so let's just have Gangle and Zooble have a random talking scene in the middle of a gun shootout where we should have had this scene in episode 4 where it actually mattered to Gangle's character. I don't understand. Why would Gangle, let me ask you a question. Why would Gangle be so willing to just all of a sudden be like, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna go sit with the others again, after feeling like she just pushed them all away, after running into oncoming traffic. This girl ran into oncoming traffic and all of a sudden she's like, you know what, I think these people do actually still care. What? And then she also just accepts the hand of Zooble, despite the fact that Zooble is the one who gave her the happy mask and made her turn out this way. So even if Gangle didn't blame Zooble, she would have not have taken Zooble's hand out of anybody because Zooble tried and failed. So why would Gangle all of a sudden be like, you know what, I trust Zooble the most? It makes no sense. It feels like the episode just had to resolve its plot, and so the best way you could do that is just be like, you know what, Gangle, we still care about you, so come back with us. And that's it. That's all they did. They never solved the actual conflict, which was the point of the mask. It's what the mask is. Instead, held out on it for episode 6. But the reason why that's a problem is because in episode 5, Gangle is literally a background character again. She is once again relegated to the background as an extra, where she does essentially fuck all in episode 5. So then all of a sudden in episode 6, she's back to having her depression regarding the mask. Why? Why all of a sudden is she back having this conflict again? Why not in episode 5 as a follow-up? It makes no sense. Why would we just skip a whole episode of focusing on the story just to come back on the story later? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. We didn't build anything. We didn't make like Gangle go through a depression arc at all. So why would I feel for Gangle in episode 6 if we didn't actually build it up? I thought we resolved it already. It's the same thing of what I said with Pomni and Gummy Goo earlier, except 10 times worse with Gangle here, because it makes no sense why Gangle's conflict would be brought up in the random of a gun shootout again, just because. Like, it genuinely doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why that happened. I don't understand why we are resolving a conflict we already resolved in episode 4. Now, it was a poor, terrible execution of a resolution, but why are we doing it again? Why are we resolving it again? Why are we having another resolution like this again? That's bad writing. misleading, especially considering the fact that Zooble never takes accountability for being the one who gave her the mask to begin with. Like, you would think that a character that cares all so much about Gangle going into these next couple of episodes, that she would have been accountable for her own personal actions and contributions to why Gangle felt the way she did in this particular episode. But because she doesn't, and because the episode is just resolved, everything that happens in this episode gets completely undermined, as if it meant nothing, because it doesn't mean anything. Because if this episode truly meant something, then why in episode 5 was this never brought up again? Why does in episode 5 the issues regarding Gangle, why was that never prevalent again? Why did it wait till episode 6 for a random scene for them to just resolve the conflict out of nowhere, out of thin air, when the story did not revolve around Gangle in the slightest? This was Gangle's character episode. So you either had one of two ways to do this. You either could have had Gangle go on her depression arc, pushing Zooble away, so that way going into episodes 5 and episode 6, she's on a down note, so where when that scene happens in episode 6, you can resolve the issue and solve the conflict of the arc, which is that Gangle is depressed and is isolating herself because she feels like she's hurting people in the process. Or you could have went the other way, which is resolve the conflict in this episode being its own individual episode, so that way going forward when Zooble and Gangle are interacting with each other, it's because this episode occurred and this episode actually meant something. And it's a big tell. This is a big tell, right? This is a big tell if your story is good. If you can skip an entire episode and not miss out on anything, that's usually a tell and a sign that you have filler and your story is really bad. Because if I can go from episode 3 to episodes 5 or even 6 and go, I didn't have to watch anything in Fast Food Masquerade to understand the story currently or see where the characters are, like if I missed essentially nothing and the characters are in the exact same spots as they were from episode 3, that means that this episode is literally the definition of filler and is literally the definition of a waste of time and amounted to nothing. No character development, nothing. If I could go from episode 3 to episode 5 or to episode 6 without having to watch episode 4 and the story is exactly the same and nothing changed, that means that this episode's filler and it sucked. And it's because Gangle's arc wasn't paid off. We didn't have Gangle going through a depression arc, or we didn't resolve the conflict within this episode and then randomly decided to bring up this story again when it was irrelevant. I don't understand what is the booking behind that. This brings me to the topic of discussion that I like to call 50-50 booking. Now, in terms of 50-50 booking, what it essentially means is that when you book something to be one way, at some point you contradict yourself by booking it another way when it should be booked the exact same way. So, for example, if you have a serious moment in a story and you're supposed to make us care about something, but then in the next episode you undermine that storyline, and then in the episode after that you try to make us care about that same storyline again, that's what we like to call 50-50 booking, where now we don't know how we're supposed to feel because in one episode you made us care, and another we didn't, and now we're supposed to care again. And it results in a conflict of interest of contradictions, because, for example, Gangle in this episode is supposed to be a main focal point that I'm supposed to, as an audience member, care about in regards to her depression and in regards to her complications mentally. The problem with her booking is that up to this point in time, Gangle has been booked to be an irrelevant character. Now all of a sudden is the main star of this episode, which is what I mentioned earlier, how Pomni got pushed to the side and got pushed as a background character in this episode strictly to Gangle, because for some reason Gangle had to have the biggest character spotlight out of all of them, even though that she's the most irrelevant in terms of the whole story as a whole. Because genuinely ask yourself, what does Gangle offer to the story as a whole? Now granted, episode 8 and episode 9 are not out yet, so maybe Gangle actually can offer something to the story. Maybe it has something to do with her little drawings of different characters. You know, I made a theory about that, how I believe that Gangle was going to be killed by Caine because he was going to believe Gangle to be an NPC, and then the drawings that Gangle made would be the things that would make these NPC versions of characters that are brought back to remember who they originally were, and then kind of be like replacements in terms of their memories and stuff. But that was just a theory. But in terms of like what we've gotten so far with Gangle, we've gotten nothing with Gangle's character. Gangle's character has not added anything to the main story at hand. Not in terms of the plots of abstraction, not in terms of the plots of the escape of the circus. She's offered literally nothing. And in episode 7, when she could have had a chance to provide a role and some kind of involvement in actually helping escape, she did nothing. All she did was just tell Kinger the plan, and that was it. Same thing with Zooble, because Zooble is, like I said, the most useless character in the entire show, with no meaning and no purpose, and it's just literally there just to be there. But with Gangle's character, when you have so much tied to her character but then don't use it, and you waste that potential, it makes you wonder, like, why did we spend episode 4 focusing so heavy on Gangle's character if she was going to amount to no character development? You would think that a show that's all about character development, that the characters would be consistent in terms of their development, but it's not true, because in episode 5, the literal follow-up to episode 4, the show goes out of its way to literally exclude Gangle as much as possible. Gangle becomes the butt of the joke in Jax's adventures. Gangle gets cut away every time it's a scene about her, whether it be the softball, the stargazing, or whatever she's working on in the bar and in the anime. And then even with the evil clones, she doesn't even get an evil clone, because apparently Gooseworx thought it would be funny that she doesn't get an evil clone. But like, why go out of your way so hard to exclude Gangle from being an actual character of interest when you spent so much time trying to make us care about Gangle in this episode? That's the literal definition of 50-50 booking. How can I care about a character when you don't care about the character the same way that you want me to care about a character? When you book a character to be the most meaningful thing in the world, I want to take you at heart. But then when you book the character to mean nothing in the next episode, how can I take this character seriously going forward? And this is another episode where it's a great example of that, because in this episode, Gangle, the reason why she ends up running into oncoming traffic and isolating herself away is because Ragatha told her that she was being annoying and wasn't even trying to be offensive. She literally went out of her way to say, like, no offense, but you're kind of annoying. That was literally the spiral that pushed Gangle over. And I'm supposed to look at this like Gangle got super hurt by a friend that she really thought was close with, because she doesn't know if Ragatha's being so genuine or not. And that was supposed to be like the domino effect that leads to Gangle going on this depressive arc. But the entire time I'm thinking to myself, is like, why am I supposed to care? Why do I care about Gangle getting upset over the smallest of comments? Like, seriously? This is what causes her to be depressed? This makes her look more insane and weird and fucked up mentally than it would have had she actually had, like, Ragatha say something genuine rude, or actually, you know what, better yet, actually been rude to Ragatha in that moment. Gangle wasn't rude in that moment, and Ragatha was drunk or high and just said that she was annoying. That was it. But apparently that led to the whole suicide attempt, and I'm supposed to feel like, oh man, I feel bad for Gangle? How? When literally in the exact same episode, may I remind you, Gangle stood there and watched Ragatha burn alive in the deep fryer.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea how this looks?
She burned alive in the deep fryer, and Gangle just walked off. Like, what? And then I'm supposed to care about Gangle when she gets offended by being called annoying and then tries to kill herself? Like, what? Like, bitch, you're freaking out. Chill the fuck out. Why the hell are you jumping into oncoming traffic when you didn't even help Ragatha earlier when she was burning alive? And mind you, if I'm supposed to feel like these characters can get genuinely hurt, right? And genuinely suffer and genuinely feel in pain, how can I feel, this is why 50-50 booking sucks. How can I feel bad for Gangle if I'm not supposed to feel bad for Ragatha earlier? Like, is nobody gonna help Ragatha when she's burning in the deep fryer? Am I supposed to laugh at that like a joke? Well, then later on, when Gangle tries to kill herself, is that supposed to be a joke too? Am I supposed to laugh at that because she's fucking crazy and she just tried to kill herself because her friend called her annoying one time? Holy shit. Like, what are you talking about? This is the kind of booking that I hate. It's like, why would you book it like that? Because now I look like a jackass because I don't care about this character, even though you haven't done anything to make me care. So when she's going through a rough time in the actual story, now I look like a jackass for not giving a shit despite the fact that you have not given me a reason to actually give a shit. Like, why am I supposed to give a shit about what Gangle goes through if I'm not supposed to give a shit about what Ragatha goes through? Ragatha gets dropped into the deep fryer, and then throughout the entire episode has to go around walking drunk or high, and I'm not supposed to care? Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. So am I supposed to care about these characters or not? Genuinely, I'm asking, because apparently with this 50-50 booking shit, I don't know if I am. Because apparently nobody, not Pomni, even though Pomni just became best friends with Ragatha, and not Zooble, even though Zooble decides, yeah, let me help Ragatha later, and not Gangle in that moment, despite the fact that now, out of all the times I should be helping Gangle, I don't understand. What is this 50-50 booking? You're not consistent. Like, I have 3 pet peeves in storytelling. 3 big pet peeves. One of them is wasted potential. One of them is retconning or contradictions to the world building. And then another one is if a character that is like white hot or that I'm very interested and invested in is just getting absolutely railed by the writers or the creator just because, for literally no reason at all other than fuck you for caring about that character. And in this case, I feel like I'm getting all 3 at once. I got wasted potential in what this episode could have actually been about, which I will give my booking on how I would have actually booked this episode. I got 50-50 booking in regards to what the world building is supposed to be about and what the character development is supposed to be about. So I don't know if I'm supposed to care and feel bad for certain characters or not in moments that it should be very straightforward and obvious, because sometimes the show decides, well, actually, we're going to laugh at this character suffering, but then this time we're going to be very serious about this character suffering. So I don't know, very inconsistent booking. And then on the third case, we're watching a character that I'm very invested and interested in getting shafted by the writers and the creator for no reason. I'm watching Ragatha, who to me is like one of the best characters I've seen in a hot minute, like how sweet and kind-hearted she is, burning in a deep fryer with absolutely nobody helping her, despite the fact that I'm supposed to feel bad with nobody helping Gangle later. Like, what? I don't understand the 50-50 booking here. This is why the shit sucks, man. Oh my god, I hate this episode. It's so bad. But I haven't even gotten to the other stuff that's wrong with this episode. I haven't even gotten to Jax yet. You know it's bad when I haven't even gotten to Jax yet. Now, in storytelling, when it comes to writing, sometimes it will become very obvious when a certain character has become the writer's favorite. Now, the way that you can spot when a character has become the writer's favorite is through little intricacies and little moments that highlight this character in a more glorious, positive light than you would think they would actually be highlighted in. For example, if a character is doing something bad, you would think that this character would be punished for the bad thing, but because the character is the writer's favorite character, the character doesn't actually get punished. However, in other instances where storytelling doesn't involve this character being in a very prominent role, the writer will find a way to introduce or have this character be very prevalent to the role, despite the fact that the character doesn't really fit in the context of whatever role that is. And in this case, it's not obvious, Jax is Gooseworx' favorite character, not to mention the fact that Gooseworx thinks that he is the most alike to Jax, which says a lot, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But in this episode in particular, I feel like it really shows a lot, because if you've been paying attention to the show for the past couple of episodes, episodes 1 and 2 in particular, and even 3, have showcased that Jax can be very antagonistic to the likes of Gangle and Ragatha in particular, and it even goes as far to, in episode 3, to have him get a sort of comeuppance in episode 3. But an example of writer's favorite is like in episode 3, which I'm going to use as an example right now. You would think that episode 3 would have a very integral story beat that focuses on Ragatha and Gangle getting their comeuppance on Jax by managing to tie him up to avoid whatever trouble ends up happening in the adventure, right? But because it's the writer's favorite, instead of actually showcasing to you a scene that would have actually been really good character development for both characters like Ragatha and Gangle, we instead are going to do that off screen and have it implied that these two characters that have never once been physically intimidating, have never once been negative in any way, somehow teamed together to bully Jax and tie him up for, one adventure. Even though it would have been much more satisfying as a viewer to see them actually do this in real time, to not only indicate to us that Jax is kind of actually really weak and pathetic to allow these two characters that are technically the weakest in the show to overpower him like that, which goes against his entire philosophy about being tough guy, but also serves as a storytelling narrative going into an episode like this, where Jax would be more aggravated towards the likes of Ragatha and Gangle in particular, because we got to see in real time Ragatha and Gangle standing up to Jax in order to take him down. But because that scene was completely obligated, we never truly got to see the payoff of that storyline, making the story going into this one not seem as impactful. Even though, for a show that's all about character development, you would think that they would actually showcase the character development of characters such as Ragatha and Gangle actually finally standing up for themselves to tie Jax up into a wheelbarrow and then carrying him around like he's a little kid, which to this day is still one of my favorite scenes of the entire show, is just seeing Ragatha dragging this wheelbarrow of Jax. Come on, little Timmy, we gotta go to the next adventure. The fact that that is just completely undermined because we didn't actually get to see the payoff, oh man, that shit makes me so sad. But it's just an example of writer's favorite. You can't have the writer's favorite looking bad on television now, can you? And here we are with episode 4, another egregious example of this. Once again, Jax gets completely off the hook by the writer, aka Gooseworx. Jax will be able to throw Ragatha into the deep fryer with no consequence coming from it. Jax will get punished by Gangle for absolutely no reason, despite the fact that he is a character that would absolutely break the rules. He doesn't break the rules and actually gets punished just because he offended Gangle. So that actually makes him look like he's in an actual good light, even though the punishment in and of itself is not even a real punishment, because the punishment was just him staring at a screen.
Ooh, very scary.
Because we can't have a character like Jax be looking in a bad light. And then, when you think that in the rest of the episode where Jax is going to somehow be a nuisance, because he's clearly bothered, or he wants to challenge Caine, which he says that he doesn't believe that Caine will actually punish them, so you would think that a character like Jax would actually test the limits of that truth, and then he just fucks off for the rest of the episode, and he gets to get off of work, and you get to see how sad he is, man. Oh, I'm gonna go to my car, man, what a rough day of work. You gotta feel bad for Jax, right? Why? That's my only question. Why? This is an example of writer's favorite. And the reason why I say this is an example of writer's favorite, and I'm not just hating on Jax here, is because if this was truly told well, we would have seen the character as the character going and defying the orders of Caine like he said he would. We would have seen the character being punished for things that he actually did wrong, not for doing a whole lot of nothing. For example, like throwing Ragatha into the deep fryer, which never gets talked about. So this is the kind of shit that pisses me off in writing, because when I know that a character is just getting pushed, despite the fact that this character should not be getting pushed at all, because the way that they're telling this character is trying to paint him in such an angelic light, even though it's clearly not. He's clearly a problem, but you would be forgiven for not knowing that he's a problem, because the story really tries so hard to make him seem like just a misunderstood little chicken fetus that needs to be cracked open, or whatever the fuck cringy ass line he said in 6. I can see the flaws in the fucking writing here. You see, with an actual good writing, Jax would have not only been called out for dropping Ragatha into the deep fryer, and everybody would actually come over and help Ragatha, but Jax would have also been punished for things that he actually did wrong, like dropping Ragatha into the deep fryer, and not just simply loitering and calling Gangle a mean name, or saying that he preferred that she was sad. And the punishment would actually have been a real punishment, not just staring at a screen for fucking 10 minutes. But I'm asking for too much for a show, right? That's just me having my bar up here, right? Well, I'm sorry that I was treated with well-told storylines growing up to have my bar up here, to know that it's capable. So when I see that it's not being done and it's not being utilized, of course I'm going to be upset about it. Of course I'm going to be passionate about it, because I have seen better. I have seen better execution. So when I see a character like Jax being poorly executed, of course I'm gonna be upset about that. I may hate Jax as a character because of how he's written, but that doesn't mean that I'm just gonna completely undermine Jax's character flaws and his actual problems within the show. The reason why I don't give a fuck about Jax is because of shit like this episode, where his flaws get completely undermined so that he looks like a fucking angel in this episode, despite the fact that he's doing wrong things and is not getting punished for it. He's not getting the consequence that he deserves. And the times that he should have got the consequence that he deserves, the consequence is minuscule. In a moment like the previous episode where you wanted to see him get punished and wanted to see Ragatha and Gangle team up on him to be tied up and put in a wheelbarrow, they cut away. They never show it. They never show what happened. And then they're like, oh yeah, look, Jack got tied up by Ragatha and Gangle, even though it makes no sense how Ragatha and Gangle just suddenly, all of a sudden, decide to go out of character and just team up together to tie this son of a bitch up. Like, I don't understand how that sequence happened without having the context. But here in this episode, it's very egregious because you would think that the character would be in character, but the character goes out of character for no reason. Absolutely zero reason. So let me tell you, if Jax is a chaotic evil, right? If he's chaotic evil, he's going around, he's trying to be the funny one. That's his whole gimmick, right? He's trying to test Caine, he's trying to test all the other characters. So why at no point in the episode does Jax break the rules, or does Jax go against Caine? Because I have to ask you why he wouldn't, right? It's in his character in every way, shape, or form to defy Caine. He literally says in the episode that he doesn't think that Caine would actually punish them. You don't think Caine would actually punish us, so why not show him test the outer limits of that? Why not show him go against and defy orders? Why not show him be fed up with Gangle trying to boss him around? Why? Just because he got taken to the back room and watched a training tape? Am I supposed to believe now that Jax wouldn't have the balls to do something? Like, oh no, I got held down and watched a training tape. If anything, that should have been more of a reason for him to want to go against and defy orders, because Gangle just abused her power against him, and it would make sense that nobody cares over the fact that she just abused power over him, and then it would make him more of a reason why he would want to just be more of a nuisance to her and cause problems. Or, on the other side of the coin, Jax should realize that the least that Caine is going to do is just make him watch a training tape. Man, that's nothing. I'm going to just do whatever I want anyway. If Caine's not going to actually punish me for real, I might as well just do whatever I want. And yet, the character that's supposed to be that way is not that way and goes completely out of character for the rest of the episode, literally does absolutely fuck all, and then just goes home, and that's it. That's literally it. That's all Jax does this episode. He does nothing.
Can't tell a compelling story where nothing bad happens. Where's the intrigue? The stakes?
We had a story set up for what Jax could have done in the episode, establishing the rules of Caine, establishing his conflicts with Gangle, establishing that he doesn't believe the consequences of Caine, and then we never get the payoff. And the so-called payoff was Gangle abusing her power in a moment where Jax actually did nothing wrong, and then Jax gets seemingly like traumatized over watching a training tape? Dude watched a training tape and was like, yeah, I'm not gonna test my luck anymore. What? You didn't even test your luck before. Gangle clearly abused her power in that moment just because she got offended by you. So I don't understand. This is the kind of inconsistent 50-50 booking that I fucking hate. Writer's favorite? Yeah, clear as day. Thanks for making it obvious. And guys, I want you to know that I'm not making this shit up out of my ass. I'm literally utilizing the context of the actual storytelling to showcase to you how I know these things. I've told you how Jax is the writer's favorite by showcasing to you the moments that Jax should have got a comeuppance, he never actually does. And then the moments where he doesn't deserve a comeuppance, he gets punished and abused by the other characters, and we're supposed to feel sympathy for him. That is literally the definition of writer's favorite, when the writer's favorite has to look good at all times, no matter what, even in the moments when he's looking completely like a piece of shit. There's an entire scene, I even commented this on my reaction video, there's an entire scene where Jax and Zooble have a meaningless conversation at the beach, just so that they can show off Jax's cool render with him being wet. Literally, that is what they did. I wish I was making it up. That's literally what they did. Zooble goes over to him and it's just like, why you not causing problems? It's because like, I don't feel like it. Well, you should talk about your problems. Nah, I'm just gonna leave you guys. Literally, that entire interaction, meaningless, pointless, led to nothing, and it was just to showcase Jax's new render. It's just, it's cool looking render, like it's this cool, I'm gonna be honest, it is a cool render. It looked fucking awesome. It was like a mix of real with cartoon. It was like a really good mix. But you can't tell me that that was not a deliberate scene just to do just that, just to show off his render. Like, what else was the point of the scene of him talking to Zooble of all people? Like, oh, Zooble got one up on him. Okay, and it doesn't come back at any point later in the episode on what the purpose of Zooble doing that is. Obviously, Zooble says, you know, oh, you've been doing all this shit for me for years and all this shit. And apparently, Zooble lists off stuff that he did to Gangle in adventures before Pomni's time, which makes me wonder once again, Zooble, where the fuck were you all this time? Why have you never helped Gangle before? Why all of a sudden do you feel the need to want to stand up for Gangle, despite the fact that you haven't stood up for Gangle in episode 4 when Gangle needed your help? Hell, you don't even stand up for Gangle in the next episode that I'm going to talk about later. So, I don't understand this shit. This 50-50 booking crap. I hate it. But that leads us all the way back to the last story plot that's supposed to be introduced in this episode, which is the submission box storyline. The entire reason why the characters go to Spudsies is because they submitted their own personal adventures, and Caine picked one out of his hat where it was Gangle's submitted adventure of them going to work at a fast food joint. And then, I shit you not, after Gangle calls up Caine, has a little conversation, he's like, oh, motivation. Alright, I'll give a consequence to whatever happens to the characters if they decide to break your rules. Then that's it. That's literally all Caine's storyline goes to. He does nothing else in the episode. He shows up one time to be like, here's your grade. I give you a B+ because I'm apparently nice to these people, which is contradictory to what the story's supposed to be, because later on, I'm supposed to think that Caine is a jackass that utilized these players for his own, you know, personal entertainment, despite the fact that in this episode, he did nothing to harm them at all. So, what? You would think that the narcissistic character that's supposed to be built up as somebody like who clearly doesn't understand human emotion in this episode would try to ruin their fun, or would try to accidentally, you know, not knowing, would harm their experience. But according to Pomni and Zooble going into the next episode, they liked it, despite the fact that Caine clearly did interfere with the episode by incorporating his own personal ideas into the actual adventure. So, I don't know if you guys know this, but around the time that this episode came out, which I was not watching the show around that time, but around the time that this episode came out, all the animators, creators, and stuff, they were talking about all the Easter eggs in the episode, like all the behind-the-scenes stuff that was going on in the episode, like, oh, this is Spudsy, you know, the backstory behind this is that he's the psychopathic butcher that Caine mentioned earlier on in the adventure that he wanted to incorporate. But the thing is, with all of that, I don't care. And the reason why I don't care is because it doesn't become prevalent to the story. Why do I care about all these background Easter eggs if none of it becomes relevant to the actual plot of what's going on? It would have been one thing if the Spudsy stuff actually came into play in regards to their adventure, and the NPCs started to become suspicious, like, what the fuck are you feeding us? Like, what is this food? Like, is this actual, like, human meat? Is that what this is? And, you know, it could have caused a conflict of interest, but it never happens. And because it never happens, it never paints Caine in a bad light, despite the fact that he clearly interfered with their own personal adventure when he was not supposed to. This is supposed to be their adventure, what they wanted, but he interfered. But it never becomes prevalent, and yet I'm supposed to think that it was, like, I'm supposed to care that it's supposed to be, even though it never actually becomes prevalent. So Caine did incorporate his own ideas, but if they never actually interfered with their adventure, then why am I supposed to feel like this guy's a jackass, or I'm supposed to feel like he's a problem if he didn't actually create any problems? It would have been one thing if it would have actually been a problem, but it wasn't. But then going into the next episode, he then clear as day incorporates incorporates his ideas in front of their face, and they still end up not having a problem with it. So once again, I have to go all the way back to the purpose of the show. The purpose of the show is trying to find meaning in a stagnant life. But if the entire episode's focus was about working this 9 to 5 and reestablishing that working a 9 to 5 fucking sucks, then why would I not want to rather be in the digital circus than live this boring life where I have to work a 9 to 5? You're doing a poor job at establishing the purpose of the story. If the purpose of the story is that I'm supposed to rather not be in the digital circus because it's hell and rather, find meaning and purpose in my actual life, then you have to actually do that. But you don't do that throughout this episode. They go through the 9 to 5, the adventure that Gangle submitted that she wanted to do, and they had a miserable time. But then, next episode, Zooble and Pomni want to gaslight us to believing that they had a good time, which is not true. They did not have a good time, as according to the actual episode that I saw with my own 2 eyes. And then Caine never actually ends up punishing anybody, never gives them a true consequence, and then is light on Gangle despite the fact she jumped into oncoming traffic. And then I'm supposed to feel like this guy sucks and I don't want to be in the circus. I'd rather be in my real world where I'm going to work the 9 to 5, even though the episode just told me that working the 9 to 5 sucks. But it was supposed to make me feel like I cared about working the 9 to 5. But they didn't do that. I don't understand. That's so bad. That's bad storytelling. When you contradict yourself in your own storytelling, that's bad writing. Bad. There's no beating around the bush about it. That makes it bad. This episode is bad. It's poorly executed and nothing, and absolutely nothing from this episode got paid off. And just to reaffirm that nothing got paid off, let me go through everything once again as a recap for you. Pomni, the point of this episode was to showcase that Pomni is taking Caine's advice, reaching out, trying to be more friendly, trying to be more helpful. What does Pomni end up actually doing? She tries to help out Gangle, but then is not there for Gangle later on when she's isolated and alone. And then her new friend that she made, Ragatha, she doesn't help her when she gets thrown into the deep fryer, even though she's her best friend now, but she's nowhere to be found to help her. I don't understand about that. And then Ragatha just has like a band-aid because it's supposed to be a funny gag. And then with the plotline with Gummy Goo, she all of a sudden is like awkward and doesn't know how to feel because she feels more attached to Gummy Goo than she does her other friends like Ragatha or Kinger, who should have been in the episode. And speaking of Kinger was not in the episode. He was completely written off, even though this would have been a really good episode for him to be in. Why was he written off? Just because I guess the writers didn't want him to solve the conflicts so easily, even though it wouldn't have amounted to that. It doesn't automatically mean that the conflicts are going to be solved just for Kinger being there. And if it's just for a gag, it sucks that you have to waste an entire character just to do a one-off gag. If you have to waste a character's development just to do a gag, that's bad writing. There's no way of writing around that. I'll tell you that much. Ragatha also ends up doing nothing, and everything that's supposed to build up her story going into the next episode amounts to nothing because the things that she says to Gangle are so weak and pathetic. She's literally, all she said was that she was annoying.
No offense, but you're kind of annoying when you have your happy mask.
Yeah, I know. I wanna say I'm sorry for the things I've done. And I try and be stronger.
And that was it, and that set Gangle off, despite the fact that everything that Jax has done up to this point in time has been far worse than anything that Ragatha could even try to do.
I like you better when you're sad.
And yet I'm supposed to care about that despite the fact that Gangle also doesn't help Ragatha, who's burning alive in the deep fryer, and I'm supposed to feel bad for Gangle because she thought that Ragatha was her friend and she took that annoying comment so personally to where she jumps into oncoming traffic.
I understand the criticism may be offensive to you, and I'm very sorry that offends you, but my criticism remains valid.
Yeah, no. And speaking of Gangle ends up not getting any character progression whatsoever because everything that happens in this episode gets completely undermined by the ending where it just gets automatically resolved because Gangle is like, oh, you know what, Zooble, you're right, I'm gonna go sit with you guys again. And thanks, Zooble. So now she goes back, sits with them again, and then she becomes irrelevant in the next episode once again. Obscure character, you just wasted my time with development that amounted to nothing because then once again in episode 6 the plotline is reestablished like it wasn't just solved in this episode. So you either solved it or you didn't. And if you're saying that you didn't solve it and you held off on it, that means you literally deliberately put Gangle in the background in episode 5 for no reason. That's bad character development. For a show that's all about character development, you would think they would actually develop their characters. I'm gonna keep going back to that and saying the same thing. I sound like a broken record, but I gotta keep doing that so that you get the point, because it happens more times than you think. And speaking of irrelevant, pointless characters, Zooble is the domino effect starting Gangle's downward spiral by giving her the happy mask at the beginning, never once takes accountability, for some reason doesn't help Gangle when she actually needs help, and instead chooses to help Ragatha, despite the fact that she doesn't choose to help Ragatha earlier in the episode, which makes no sense why all of a sudden, you know what, she's gonna pick Ragatha over Gangle, and then at the end, doesn't take accountability for being one of the reasons why Gangle is feeling down and depressed, and just is like, you know what, Gangle, just come hang out with us again. And then that's it. That's literally all Zooble does. We never get one touch up on her body dysmorphia this episode. We never get anything, discussions regarding her identity, regarding how she personally feels, regarding her hatred towards Caine. We never get to see her actually enjoy Gangle's adventure over Caine's adventure, you know, actually having a good time. We never get to see any of that. Zooble literally accomplished nothing. We go from beginning to end. What did Zooble accomplish? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And clearly, she had a miserable time at the fast food joint, but then the next episode wants to gaslight me into believing that she had a good time because she said so. Yeah, right. Bro, I watched the episode. You're not gonna trick me. Just because you have a fucking, 6-month time gap between episode 4 and 5, doesn't mean that I'm gonna suddenly forget what happened in episode 4. I could always go back, rewatch it, and see that you fucked up, and that you didn't actually do anything in regard to that character development, but I'm supposed to believe it just because the character said so. No. And then Jax, the writer's favorite, doesn't get punished when he deserves to get punished, but then gets abused and punished when he shouldn't be punished, and then amounts his character to absolutely nothing for the rest of the episode just because he watched a training tape for 10 minutes, but because he was being held down, I guess that was enough to traumatize him to be like, yeah, I'm not gonna test Caine, even though he literally goes later and is like, you don't actually think Caine is gonna punish us, do you? Like, bro, either you gonna break the rules, or you're gonna shut the fuck up and stop wasting my screen time, damn it. That screen time where you're doing a whole lot of nothing, Jax, can be used for these other characters to develop them. But you know, for a show that's all about character development, they don't actually develop the fucking characters. You would think that they would actually develop the characters, but no, Jax gets no development. The only thing that we get is that, oh, he hates 9-to-5s. Who fucking doesn't? The point of this episode was supposed to make us feel like we need to find meaning in a stagnant life, and instead it just doubled down on 9-to-5s being terrible for, I guess, relatability, because for some reason relatability means good story, even though that's not true. And the story that we could have gotten regarding Caine and all of his implementation in regards to the adventure to showcase that he is the problem and that living in the digital circus is worse than doing a 9-to-5 in real life, we don't get. And instead, Caine's actually nice in this episode and doesn't punish anybody. So now that I've went through everything, I hope you can see how this episode has failed in every single aspect in regards to all of its characters and in regards to the entire point of this episode even existing. Once again, may I mention the fact that if I can go from episode 3 to episode 5 or even episode 6 without missing anything in this episode because it does nothing and accomplishes nothing, that means that this episode is completely useless and pointless and a waste of time and is literally the definition of filler, and I would have much rather had actual filler than this piece of shit of an episode, because in the actual filler we would have actually had an entertaining, fun time with whatever adventure that Caine actually brought us on. It would have made for fun television. I'm here to watch a show, and if you want me to get the purpose of the show, either focus on the purpose of the show, and if not, then you gotta make a fucking entertaining show to still get me invested. One of my personal favorite shows is Total Drama Island. Now, something to note about Total Drama Island and all of its various seasons is that there are many, and I mean many, terrible writing flaws. Terrible writing decisions, terrible choices that are made randomly throughout every season of the show. Every season. That make you question what the hell is the booking of this character, what the hell is the booking of this story. But you know what I love about this show that always brings me back to watch it again regardless of its flaws, is that it's actually entertaining. It actually goes out of its way to make whatever tasks that they have to do throughout the episode, whatever missions that Chris McLean puts them on, actually fun. Each of them, I always have a fun time watching because I'm always thinking to myself, what the hell crazy adventure are they going to do in this episode? And every time I I watch it back, it's always fun. It's always fun to see these characters go on these crazy adventures. And that's something we could have gotten in this show, but for some reason, Gooseworx thought it would have been filler. And yet here we are with actual filler right in front of me, except the problem with this filler is that it's boring filler that does nothing for the point of the story and is not entertaining in the slightest, because I'm just watching a bunch of characters working a 9 to 5 when I literally could be required and forced to do that. Why would I wait several months for an episode drop just to watch what I already know to be the case? That 9 to 5 suck, and that's it. And then I go to work my 9 to 5 and realize, man, this shit sucks. When instead, I could have actually learned something from this episode, watched this episode, found some nuance in working a 9 to 5 that I didn't know about, that I can actually make me have a good time working my job so I don't feel like I want to kill myself. Do you understand it? Do you understand how simple storytelling is when you actually do it right? If not, allow me to demonstrate, because now is the time where I get to display and get to tell you all about how I would have booked episode 4 with all the plot lines that was set up and with all the character storylines that should have been set up and paid off in this episode. Now, normally when I do it how I would book, sometimes, there's two ways you could do it, right? One way is that I could book it completely, reinvent it, right? Do my own thing. All right, what would I do with the characters in episode 4? All right, here's what I would do. To me, this is one of those examples where I'm going to book it with all the storylines that were introduced. So I did this with my Spectacular Spider-Man rebooking. I rebooked season 2, but when I rebooked season 2, I utilized all the scenes, all the storylines that were introduced within season 2 and just rearranged them or restructured them to make for a better narrative and flow of a story. Now here, I'm going to do the same thing with episodes 4 and episodes 5. I'm going to rebook episode 4 with all the different storylines that was introduced in this episode to how the episode should have played out in regards to the story leading into episode 5, and then I'm going to do the same thing with episode 5, go through all the flaws, go through each character and their storylines, go through the big story flaws, and then how I would book episode 5 to make it for a setup for episode 6. So please sit back, enjoy as I once again talk about episode 4, Fast Food Masquerade, aka my version of Fast Food Masquerade and the superior version of what should have actually been in the actual show, based off of what Gooseworx storyline was supposed to be, not only in this episode, but also going forward for the episodes following it. The episode starts with Ragatha and Gangle playing softball together. Ragatha is trying to teach Gangle how to throw a pitch. At the same time, Jax tries to come in to play alongside them. Ragatha and Gangle are obviously on the fence about this, because considering that they just tied him up in the previous episode, they don't know whether or not they should be trusting Jax right now or whether or not he actually wants to play, but he's claiming that he genuinely wants to play softball, even though he's doing his sarcastic usual stick. But since Ragatha feels bad about what she did to Jax in the prior episode, she makes Gangle participate with him, and in doing so, Gangle throws the pitch and then Jax hits her with the ball straight on. And of course it seems like Jax did it intentionally, but in this case he actually accidentally hit the ball into Gangle's face. So obviously Ragatha turns to Jax and begins to argue with him, the two of them going at it, bickering just like they did in the actual episode, whereas Gangle this time around kind of sees how Ragatha is more focused about Jax and allowed Jax to actually play with them, and of course which caused her to once again lose her comedy mask. So Gangle decides that she's just gonna wander off on her own and regain herself, regain her emotions, regain her control. And as she wanders around, she bumps into Zooble, who had been recently trying to hide from Caine because Caine has been constantly on her nose, and now she feels like every time that she's out in the open that Caine is constantly trying to bother her, even though she had already explained to him her problems. Zooble notices, of course, that Gangle's comedy mask is once again broken, which prompts her to believe that it was Jax and makes her realize that she actually had found another mask similar to that of Gangle and tells Gangle to follow her. So the two of them make their way over to Zooble's room, and this is where we establish Zooble's room. Zooble enters and allows Gangle to enter the room, and we kind of showcase off the room a bit. See how Zooble's room is kind of like all distorted with all the mirrors to kind of reflect upon her body dysmorphia, which I think could really add upon her body dysmorphia complication. So here Zooble's going through her box box of parts and she pulls out the new comedy mask for Gangle. And Gangle wears the comedy mask and she's thinking to herself that it's perfect, that it works, that it's like really good. It makes her look cute, it makes her look happy, it makes her feel confident. And of course she thanks Zooble, and Zooble's like, oh, you don't have to. And then all of a sudden Caine comes through the room because the room door is open. And so he's like, oh, Zooble, there you are. We have an adventure today. I was looking for you two. And then of course he teleports the both of them into the main room where the others are now gathered up. Only now, after they reach the main room, does Ragatha approach Gangle about, you know, how she is, because she feels bad about leaving Gangle behind there. She was wondering where she went. She's like, yeah, Gangle, are you alright? But by this point, you know, Gangle's fine because she has the new mask, and she feels like that Ragatha should have saw how she felt or how she was beforehand, you know, before getting into an argument with Jax. So she's a little bit standoffish. And then, of course, Jax chimes in. He's like, Gangle, where the hell did you get that stupid ass mask from? And of course, that causes Ragatha to give him like a dirty look and, you know, kind of murmur to herself, this guy. And this is where Caine, you know, displays his brand new adventure, the psychopathic butcher. But of course, Pomni wants no part of it. He's like, no, thank you. I just had a horror episode and it was not good. And then Zooble is like, was that the adventure that was supposed to be for me? And Pomni tells her all about the adventure. And now, an important detail that I want to emphasize here is that not only does Zooble question like why Caine made that adventure for her, but she realizes that in the adventure that at some point Pomni gets possessed, and at that point they had to hold their breaths in order to get out. And Zooble realizes that Caine, you know, was gonna force Zooble to hold her breath. And obviously she's like, what is that about? You know, how would I have gotten out of that situation? And Caine is like, well, you know, sometimes there are mistakes and flaws in my storytelling, but you know, that's why I improve upon it. With every new adventure, you know, I'll make it better. And Zooble's like, you never make any adventures better. They're always equally as bad and worse than the previous one. He's like, well, if you think you can make a good adventure, then why don't you suggest an adventure? And then this is, of course, where the submission box is established, and Caine is like, oh, I forgot we had that. And then he goes through it and he's like, all right, what is normal to you people? And then when he gets to the 9 to 5, Gangle's like, yeah, that seems normal enough, you know, trying to feel like she's normal now that she has her new mask. And so Caine puts them on a 9 to 5, and obviously Jax is like, you did not just make that the adventure, you little shit. But even though this is Gangle's adventure, Zooble is not willing to go through with it, believing that Caine is just going to somehow ruin the experience, or, you know, just working the 9 to 5 in general is just going to be like a stupid thing. But Caine has had enough of her rambling and decides that he's just going to teleport her there regardless of the fact. She drops her into a trap door, and the rest of the characters, of course, are brought to Spudsies, where Gangle is actually made to be the manager by Caine because she showed initiative, already establishing that her confidence has made her get a positive outcome in the circus, which I think is a very important thing to point out, because that's going to display in her character arc throughout this episode, where she becomes more egotistical and more confident with this new mask, and it causes conflicts later. So as they arrive at Spudsies, Gangle's getting everything set up, you know, turning on everything, getting everybody in position, and then this is where Jax gets the brilliant idea to throw Ragatha into the deep fryer. And now as this happens, you know, you have Pomni, Kinger, and Zooble all, well, actually Zooble might be injured, you know, she fell face first on the floor. So we have Pomni and Kinger specifically go and pull Ragatha out, and they're like, you know, we need Jax to have some kind of like temperament so that he doesn't ruin this adventure. And so Gangle's obviously like, oh no, we ain't gonna have anything like that in this adventure. So she decides she's gonna call up the higher ups, and she calls Caine, is like, you know, Caine, can we have a punishment waiting for these people for the end of the adventure? And Caine's like, motivation, you know, that's what I need, that's what I'm looking forward to. But the thing that kind of catches people off guard when she says that is that she doesn't just establish a consequence or a punishment just for Jax specifically. She puts a punishment and a consequence on all of them. So if all of them fail to comply with her adventure, they will get punished. So now, you know, everybody's kind of like, Gangle, why did you do that? We could have just punished Jax. And it's like, oh, I didn't really think about it. You know, she's kind of like passing it off like, oh, I didn't really think about it too much. And then she kind of wanders off. And then, of course, Ragatha being Ragatha, you know, she's a little bit suspicious by this, you know. Gangle didn't even try or attempt to help her out of the deep fryer despite being the one next to Jax when she got thrown in there. And then now she's kind of looking at Gangle like, why would Gangle want to punish the rest of the characters? You know, why would she want to do that to everybody else when Jax is the conflict here? So she kind of gives a little glance over at Gangle walking away, kind of like, what was that about? So this is where things kind of like start off. You know, Zooble's trying to work the counter. She immediately burns her hand because, tell me, you have to use a spatula. She immediately burns her hand because she tried to use her hand as a spatula. And then, of course, course, we get Orbs Man coming in. You can have that whole ordeal. Gangle reprimanding Jax about hating the customer in front of the customer, and Ragatha going to do the order and getting stupid sauce in her eye, causing her to get drunk and high. As Jax also at the same time, you know, he's kind of going over to Zooble like, you actually doing the job? Like, what the hell? And Zooble's like, yeah, I don't want Caine to punish me, you know? And Jax is like, nah, Caine ain't gonna do nothing wrong. And Zooble's kind of like, are you sure about that? But Jax doesn't really know just yet, but he kind of has in the back of his mind, I don't think Caine's gonna do it, but I don't really know, so I'm not gonna test it just yet. But he is gonna test it eventually. But before he does that, you know, we have to have the whole Gummy Goo meeting up with Pomni. And instead of Pomni being a weirdo here, I prefer that Pomni actually tries to make conversation with Gummy Goo, trying to see, you know, do you remember me? Do you know who I am? Do you have any recollection of who I am? And then it causes like Gummy Goo to feel weirded out because she seemingly knows so much about him, but he has no idea who she is. And then of course Gangle steps in, is like, Pomni, stop weirding out the customers. And Pomni's trying to be like, well, I know this person, you know, I know who this is. I'm just trying to see if he remembers me. And Gangle's gonna be like, are you questioning my authority? Showing the first signs of Gangle already beginning to crack under the pressure of being in this position. But you know, it's not immediate. I don't want it to be like too obvious, even though we already saw like Ragatha's vision when she got drunk and high of like seeing Gangle actually being corrupt and evil. I don't want this to be too obvious to the other characters yet. I want it to be like Pomni finds it a little bit strange how Gangle is like thinking that she's going against her authority. She's being like, oh no, I'm not trying to challenge you, Gangle. I just wanted to have this interaction. Then Gangle's just like, well, just get back to work, you know, just focus on the work, don't focus on the Gummy Goo, you know what I mean? Because it's lunchtime and we go straight to the lunchtime. We can have the whole glowing queen thing, even though I'm not a big fan of the comedy there. You could still have that be in the episode for what the episode should be, you know, if that's the humor that's going for, then, you know, leave it, because it's not my humor, obviously, but if that's what the show's humor is, leave it in. And then you have Gummy Goo beginning to leave, you know, after getting his order, it's lunchtime, the glowing queen comes in, Ragatha has her conversation with the glowing queen, Jax is kind of weirded out by the glowing queen. And so you have Pomni going over to try and say goodbye to Gummy Goo, feeling bad that Gummy Goo didn't remember her and kind of almost feeling like she was alone again. But then she is reminded that she has Kinger, because Kinger is there and he's having a good time with the customers. You know, he's talking with the glowing queen as well. He's hanging out with Ragatha, who's just off her rockers, like she is on something. And so, you know, Pomni's like, you know what, I do have friends, you know, this is not too bad, so I can have a good time. And then we could do like a little bit of a montage here. We could showcase how Kinger, Pomni are all kind of like beginning to enjoy the adventure, but you know, they're messing around with the food, you know, they're getting the orders in, but they're all having like a good time, good chat, they're having fun cooking, they're having fun serving. And then you could also showcase how like Ragatha is struggling because she's drunk and high, and then how Jax, of course, is just hating it. You know, why is everybody just like actually going along with this? Why is everybody just enjoying the adventure? Like, this shit sucks, it's so boring, like I can't do this, man. And then at some point when serving more of the food, we have some customers beginning to complain at the register regarding how the food is, and you know, they're beginning to complain that, you know, the food tastes off, or something's wrong with the food. And Pomni goes to try and see what's up. You know, she goes to Ragatha, see, you know, hey Ragatha, what's going on with the food, because she's obviously struggling a little bit, but she doesn't know what's going on with Ragatha. She seems off-putting, and so she tries to get Gangle to come over and be like, you know, hey, is Ragatha all right? And then Gangle, you know, kind of makes some passing comments like, yeah, Ragatha, you should get back to work. You know, why are you being so lazy? Get your game in. You do all this other stuff in the other adventures, but now you're not doing this with my adventure. Gangle kind of feels a little bit insulted by Ragatha that she's not doing her adventure, that she's just kind of like moseying around. But every other adventure that they did with Caine, she had a good time. You know, she was always doing the tasks that were required, like in episode 2 when they went to the Candy Kingdom and she was all in it. You know, she was playing into the role. But here she's not really doing anything because Gangle doesn't know that she's drunk and high right now, and so she's kind of criticizing Ragatha, like, get back to work, you know, why are you being so lazy? I want you to participate. So Pomni finds that a little bit odd. You know, she's kind of like, chill out a little bit, Gangle, you know, I don't know what's going on with her, but you know, she'll do the job. And then Ragatha will leave a little bit of a passing comment to Pomni specifically, and she kind of says like, yeah, Gangle's kind of annoying with that comedy mask, huh? And it makes Pomni wonder, like, well, why do you think that, Ragatha? It's because like, yeah, she's bossing me around and she's like waving her authority, and it kind of spawns this thought into Pomni, like, what is going on with Gangle? Or it also spawns spawns this thought into Pomni about what's going on with Ragatha. You know, something's odd, something's amiss going on here. You know, she was having a good time once Kinger, you know, began to spend some time with her and cooked with her, but now, you know, things are seemingly a little bit odd. Ragatha's acting weird, Gangle's acting weird, and now even Jax is acting weird. Like, Jax is asking like, yo, what's up? Like, he's trying to make small talk conversation, but she's clearly like, I don't really like you like that, dude. Like, why are you talking to me? You threw me into a moving truck before. So obviously, you know, things are a little bit strange now. And here, you know, finally Gangle, you know, calls over Jax like, Jax, get back to work. I need you to scrub these bathrooms. Get them scrub. And Jax is like, you know what? No, I don't want to clean the bathrooms. I don't feel like it. You know, it's just boring. And Gangle's like, you questioning my authority? And then of course Jax is like, you're damn right I'm questioning your authority. You know, I liked you better when you were sad. And then that's the first sign of Gangle breaking. You have the whole gimmick like chink, the broken glass. And then Gangle's like, you know what you need? You need some more training. And then of course this is where she calls in Caine's little hands, and Caine brings him to the back room, and he's forced to watch a training tape because he, you know, at first he tries to leave. He's like, this is weird, I ain't trying to watch this. But then he gets held down. He's like, no, you're watching this training tape no matter what. And Pomni saw this, you know, she sees this and she's kind of wondering like, hey Gangle, is everything all right? Like what's going on? Like why did you do that to Jax? And then Gangle is obviously, you know, she's beginning to become a little bit unhinged. She's like, well, if you want to question me and my authority and my decision making, why don't you clean the bathrooms?
Anyone else got anything they want to say?
Yeah, can I go to the bathroom? Not exactly what I had in mind.
And now Pomni's the one who has to clean the bathrooms while Jax is doing his little training tapes. And Zooble is the one who's getting moved up to the counter. So Kinger is going to be on cooking duty from now on. So Zooble is fine with doing this at first. You know, she doesn't find this to be too problematic. She doesn't have to cook. So she's going to let Kinger cook. And, you know, as long as Kinger can get the cooking done, you know, everything should be fine. But it's only when she gets to the counter that things start to become problematic for Zooble. The customers are beginning to become more and more irate. You know, they're having more and more issues regarding the food, and they haven't had that resolved yet. And so they're trying to go to Zooble, and they're like, what's going on with the food? And Zooble's like, I'm not sure, you know, we're trying to work on it. You could have like an actual normal exchange here, or like an actual realistic exchange between a customer and the worker, where like the customer's constantly complaining, but Zooble here is like, I don't know what to tell you, like you gotta ask upper management type shit. And then, you know, things go from bad to worse, because now the customers are beginning to criticize Zooble, and it's beginning to affect Zooble, because obviously Zooble has body dysmorphia. And so now that the characters are beginning to insult Zooble, and specifically about the way she looks and the way that she's acting and behaving, it's beginning to get under her skin a little bit, especially knowing like underneath the surface that even though, you know, this is not a real person, she knows that this is Caine that's kind of like throwing this onto her, and she feels even more upset because like she just had this conversation with Caine, and so is Caine just trying to fuck with her? So she's clearly like having a problem. So like she's getting angry now. She's like, yo, this is becoming too much. So she's like, Gangle, can you do something about this? And Gangle comes over and she goes into full boss mode. She starts like screaming. She starts becoming overwhelmed. She's trying to get the customers out of here. So you're bad. Get out of my restaurant or fast food joint, whatever. Get out of here. And even Zooble is kind of taken aback by this. She's like, yes, thank you, Gangle, but like I never seen you yell like that. I never seen you get like that upset about something. And it could showcase one of two things, right? It could showcase that Gangle has a lot more care for Zooble specifically, which could establish their relationship later, but it also showcases that Gangle is starting to become more unhinged with this happy mess. And I love having the two-sided perspective here, because now it makes you as a viewer and as an audience member think, like, is Gangle actually letting the mask get to her, or is there something more underneath the surface? Like she finds more respect towards Zooble, and so she finds these NPCs establishing themselves, beginning to criticize them to be even more problematic. Or like, is she just self-telling on herself because she's feeling insecure about like the customers, and she's kind of reminded of her time when she was doing the fast food and she was getting yelled at by everybody, and so Gangle's finally kind of losing it a little bit. So now with there being an issue regards to the food, Gangle rounds everybody up. She gets Jax from the room, she gets Pomni from the bathroom, and she's like, all right, everybody, we need to be on our best behavior. The profit sales are beginning to go down and dinner time is around the corner. We need to get things going. And regardless of what issues the customers have, they have to prevent the customers from leaving and prevent them from the sales going down, which of course Jax, after just watching the training tape, he's like, wasn't the training tape about the opposite? Like, the customer's always right? And this is where like Gangle's getting more frustrated with Jax. He's like, the customer's always right, but they can't dictate their work ethics because their work is more important than whatever the customers believe. So whatever goes forward, you got to do it. You got to work. So now things are gonna get more tensed going into dinner, where now, the customers are becoming more and more unhinged and more irate and becoming more and more problematic throughout the adventure, and they don't know what the hell is going on. And so Jax takes it upon himself to like get a little bit of payback on Gangle for forcing him to watch that training tape and thinking, the customer's always right? So he starts to mess around with the others and also mess around with the NPCs, going against the wishes from earlier, and starts messing around and be like, well, the customer's always right. So every time that like a customer will say something or do something, he'll always be like, well, the customer's always right, and he'll try to kind of like give them whatever they want, do whatever they ask for, and just kind of mess with the others. In a way, Pomni kind of sees this as kind of like a funny thing to do, just to mess around, because after all, these are NPCs, and this is kind of like establishing ahead of time that Jax is going to get through to Pomni in regards to the belief that, nothing's truly real around here, and that can spark that relationship. So Pomni seeing this, she finds it a little bit funny how over the top Jax is being about this whole customer's always right, and is messing with these NPCs, and it's kind of like a funny little thing now. And you can also have the scene with Ragatha going up to Jax and seeing this stuff and having her drunken high be like, man, I really hate you, Jax, but I don't want you to hate me. Is that kind of weird? And Jax is like, well, you're just off your rocker, woman. I don't know what's going on with you. And he even begins to make some small talk with Pomni again, specifically commenting on Ragatha in regards to like, why is she drunk, right? And he's kind of like making that passing comment to Pomni, trying to get some more conversations out of her. And Pomni's beginning to be a little bit more weirded out by it too, because she would have thought that whatever happened to Ragatha earlier would have worn out by now, because she wouldn't think that it would have lasted this long. But no, Ragatha is still seemingly not all the way there mentally, and Pomni's beginning to be a little bit worried by this. Why is Ragatha not fully there mentally? And so now this is where you can have the main story point finally come into the frame, as a health inspector finally arrives at Spudsy's, and he finally goes up to Gangle and he's like, well, I've been hearing that there's been a lot of complaints about the food, and so he's gonna review the food. He's gonna see what's going on with the food, what is going on with the establishment, who's running things, what's going on here, essentially. He's figuring it all out. And Gangle, obviously seeing that it's a health inspector and taking the adventure very seriously, she tries to be very respectful. She tries to make everyone be on their best behavior, but once again, Jax is just dicking around and he's not taking this seriously whatsoever, and he starts making fun of the health inspector. He starts saying, oh no, the food is poison, and he starts messing around like, and he starts to spit on the food. He starts doing a bunch of stuff that's just gonna piss Gangle off, which finally, it just makes the health inspector go, you know what, this place sucks, it's gonna get closed down. We're gonna close this place down. It is uninhabitable, and we're gonna get the authorities involved. We're gonna get police involved to figure out what's really going on around here. And so obviously this finally ticks Gangle off. Her big adventure where she can finally enjoy herself, and Jax once again ruins it for her, and now she finally snaps. She finally begins to chastise Jax, but Jax is like, you know what, I'm not gonna listen to you. This was a stupid adventure. And he's about to take her mask and he's about to break it again, but instead the mask doesn't break because the new mask is plastic. It's not breakable. And so you could have this really cool scene where he tries to break the mask, but then Gangle, she bends over, she gets the mask, and then she finally says, you know what, it's about time that you finally got what you deserve. And then you could have Caine come in and just take Jax away, and just boom, he vanishes. Wherever Caine took him, he's just gone. Don't show where Caine takes him, don't show what Caine does to Jax. Caine just takes Jax away and he's just gone out of the adventure entirely. And the characters are a little bit surprised by this. They did not expect Gangle to behave this way, or let alone just do whatever she just did to Jax. And even though most of them are kind of like, yeah, we're glad that Jax is not being a nuisance, they also feel like Gangle kind of like stepped over her boundaries. And after the entire day, the entire adventure with her having these little moments of insecurity, having these little moments of like aggression and lashing out, they're beginning to feel a little bit bothered by this, especially Ragatha, who, even though she was just drunk and high and she's just fully being her most genuine self, and after seeing this and after seeing what Gangle does to Jax, Ragatha finally also steps in, but because she's drunk high, she's like slurring over her words and stuff. She's like, Gangle, why are you doing this? You're just being rude to everybody here. You're just abusing your power. You know, Ragatha really just goes off on Gangle. She really just criticized and chastised Gangle because she's just mentally not fully there. And they just go back and forth until finally, once again, Gangle snaps. And this time she does the same thing to Ragatha. She gets Caine in here and Caine takes Ragatha too. And once again, you don't show what Caine does to Ragatha, but you just show that Gangle just calls Caine. Caine comes in, takes Ragatha, and she's gone. And now everybody's on edge. And now it's like, what did you just do? It's this shocking moment. Like, Gangle, did you actually just do that? Did you just punish Ragatha? Like, what was that about? And everybody's kind of like looking at Gangle and they're like, what the hell just happened? And Gangle finally snaps out of it. She finally kind of realizes what she just did. She just punished Ragatha off of her own accords. Ragatha didn't even do anything wrong. She just called Caine in and just had her punished. And now you have Gangle just kind of like realizing like, oh my god, what did I do? And she just starts panicking. She starts freaking out, and then she just runs off into the back area, and she runs out the back door, and you can have her screaming into the mask and just taking off the mask for a little bit and just crying to herself as everybody's just kind of comprehending what just happened, what just transpired. And this is when you can have like the authorities come in, the police are here, they're like, we're here to arrest the psychopathic butcher. And then they go into like the back room and they pull out a guy, and it's Spudsy. He's the butcher, and it turns out that Spudsy has been selling human meat and that he was a criminal and that he's the true mastermind that's been causing all the problems. And you have the authorities kind of take away Spudsy, and then Caine comes in and he's like, well, this is the first time I've seen you guys actually fail an adventure. I'm surprised. And you know, he finds it a little bit humorous because the first time that the characters really fail an adventure, it's one that's not fully by him. You know, he didn't make this adventure, it was suggested by Gangle, so he finds it a little humorous, like, oh wow, you guys actually failed that adventure? Wow, that's ridiculous. But of course the characters are kind of like over it by this point. Like, they don't know what's going on, and Zooble's like, are you serious? Did you just incorporate your own ideas into this adventure? Like, they remember from earlier how Caine was talking about how he wanted a psychopathic butcher, and they're like, you incorporate your own ideas into one of the submitted adventures. And he's kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, how else would I have gotten the entertainment? You need to have some kind of story to it. You know, you can't just watch a show and just enjoy it for doing a whole lot of nothing. Like, there was no stakes involved. There was nothing to gain from you guys actually accomplishing this adventure and going home, right? Like, what would you guys have accomplished? So Caine doesn't really like understand the kind of games or the kind of stories that are just all about regular normal things, normal life. And so Zooble's like, I knew you were a part of this, you know, I knew you were interfering. I knew that all those things that those NPCs were saying to me was just you trying to project yourself onto me and just messing with everybody and taking Ragatha away and taking Jax away, whatever you did with them. Like, I knew you were just going to do something about this. You were going to ruin this adventure once again. And Zooble is just kind of like going off on him. And then of course Caine is obviously, he's bothered a lot by Zooble, and then all of a sudden he decides to abuse his power, and then poof, Zooble's gone again. And he took Zooble, he did to Zooble exactly what he did to Ragatha and Jax. And now Pomni is beginning to like freak out because she's just seeing all of her friends be taken away by Caine, and she's like, why are you doing this to us? Why, Caine? Why do you keep putting us through this shit?
Why? You son of a bitch! Why? Tell me why!
Pomni's just like, I just want to have a normal adventure. I thought this would be the one time where I could actually enjoy myself. I could actually just have fun and be able to just chill, finally be relaxed. And she's just breaking down, and Kinger's finally coming by and he's trying to comfort Pomni now that he's getting a little bit more clarity because, you know, it's darker outside, so he's getting a little bit more clarity from the darkness. And so Caine kind of sees how Pomni is just really defeated by this, really defeated by all of his incorporations, and so he decides, you know, oh, okay, well, how about I make it up to you guys and give you guys the opportunity to actually succeed by letting you properly finish your adventure, you know? Let's see how you finish the adventure on your own. And so Pomni is just begging Caine to just let them finish the adventure just normally, without any interference, without any butcher, without any authorities or ruined food. Just let them enjoy the adventure naturally. And so Caine is like, all right, I'll leave you up to it. And he resets everything, right? He resets, he snaps in, no Spudsy storyline. and then he brings back everybody. He brings back Zooble, Jax, and Ragatha, and all three of them are kind of rattled. They're all kind of shaken up. Zooble and Jax, they're just not talking at all, and Ragatha looks just super sad and super like depressed. And clearly Caine did something to the three of them, or he put them somewhere, but obviously I think it would be better for the story to not showcase what he did to them for their character development later on, and to have them kind of all be shaken up to showcase that Caine, whatever Caine did to them, really messed with them. Like each individually, he messed with Zooble, he messed with Jax, and he messed with Ragatha, and they're really just kind of like trying to cope with whatever he just put them through. And so obviously, you know, Pomni, she's beginning to feel a little bit better now that things should be hopefully normal, and she goes over immediately to checks with everybody. You know, she checks with Zooble, and Zooble's like, you know, I don't want to talk right now, I just want to finish up and just get out of here. And so Zooble is kind of like the first one that wants to leave, and she immediately kind of like clocks out. She's like, no, I can't talk right now, we'll have a discussion some other time. And then Pomni goes to Ragatha, and Ragatha tries to play it off like, oh, nothing too bad happened, you know, everything's fine, even though she's clearly like shaken up and clearly like traumatized by whatever just happened. Jax overhears this and he's scoffing, he's kind of like bothered by it, like, you kidding me? There she is again, trying to make a positive out of something completely negative that just happened to all of us. And Gangle kind of wanders back in, and everyone kind of gives her a look. Zooble gives her a look of like defeat, and so Zooble just leaves. Ragatha gives her a look of sadness. Jax gives her a look of pure anger. You know, Jax is pissed at her. And Gangle just feels isolated from everybody, and everybody's just kind of like looking at Gangle like she did something wrong. Gangle obviously feels like that she's at fault, like everything that she did was her fault. And so of course, as closing time rounds about and everyone begins to clock out, Zooble leaves urgently. Kinger decides to take Ragatha home to comfort her and be with her for a bit. And Jax, of course, he storms off on his own. He's like, this shit sucked. This wasn't fun at all. I'll never do something like this again. You never will ever do this to me again, Gangle. He kind of like threatens Gangle, like, don't you ever try this again with me. And so Gangle is just completely depressed. She's completely out of it. She feels completely responsible for the faults at hand, and she is like damn near about to abstract the same way that she does in the actual episode. But Pomni's like, you know, it's all right, Gangle, you know, I don't blame you. You can go home first. I'll finish up the shift for you. And Gangle's like, will that be all right? And Pomni's like, yeah, it'll be fine. So Gangle leaves. She tosses that happy mask into the ether because that mask is cursed. She fucking hates that. Whatever happened, whether that was actually her, whether that was Caine's influence, whatever happened, it's left up to audience perception and interpretation. She tosses away the mask and she runs away, kind of like feeling freed from it all. And then she goes into oncoming traffic, and instead of showcasing Gangle going to Caine's office, I want to cut back here to Pomni seeing Gangle jump into a semi-truck and just being completely mortified and shocked by it, and then have Pomni be the one teleported to Caine's office, where Caine kind of congratulates her for closing up and taking responsibility of finishing up the adventure. But Pomni has no more words to say to Caine. She just kind of looks at Caine and then just walks off, and Caine just feels like, I'm such a good boss. And you can have the whole glitching thing there too, even though that Pomni clearly is just mesmerized by whatever just happened. And so when you cut back to the actual circus and everybody's there, everyone's just kind of like down in the dumps, feeling awful. You know, you have Ragatha and Pomni, they're kind of sitting there. Pomni's a bit traumatized. Ragatha is just super down in the dumps, and Gangle's all the way over to herself. And Zooble takes the time to finally go over to Gangle and see, you know, is everything all right? And Gangle is like, I pushed everybody away, and I feel like nobody likes me anymore because of it. Zooble tries to make it be like, oh no, it's not your fault, you know, it's Caine, right? It was Caine that interfered with the adventure, you know, I don't blame you at all. You know, I'm sorry for giving you that mask. I didn't know that it would make you feel this way. But Gangle, she doesn't want to hear it, you know, she wants to be to herself, and she tells Zooble, you know, I just want to be left alone. And Zooble understands, and so Zooble leaves her be, as Ragatha obviously takes the opportunity to go and check in on Zooble and be like, hey, is everything okay? And they kind of like walk off together, chatting about what transpired. And Pomni is just kind of looking around, and she sees Jax all by his lonesome, and he's obviously angered by the fact that once again Zooble, Ragatha, those characters, they're checking in on each other, but nobody's over there to check in on him. So he just kind of storms off on his own as Pomni kind of watches that transpire. And then she goes to try and talk with Kinger in his tent, and she feels completely defeated. Like, I tried to take your advice, Kinger. I tried to be a voice of reason, try to like make people feel involved to make them feel like they weren't hurt, but things still went horribly. You know, Caine still interfered, and Kinger tries to give her some advice like, sometimes you just gotta let people handle their own issues, you know? Not everything can be resolved with you interfering, you know? Kind of like a foreshadowing of the same kind of message that he's going to give to Ragatha later on in regards to complications and problems. But obviously Pomni is taking the harder hit here because she feels like the advice didn't work and that she may have been at fault for that. And I feel like ending the episode on a downer note would be very strong going into episode 5, because everybody here was affected by how this adventure went. The submitted adventure went completely horribly off the rails, and all the storylines that were supposed to be built up in this episode were officially paid off or were set up perfectly for payoffs later on. Gangle had her entire arc regarding the mask and feeling like she's pushing people away, making them feel like she put them through this hell, so that gets paid off for her character arc throughout this arc 2, throughout episodes 4, 5, and 6. You have Zooble and having her character actually go through more of her issues with Caine and more of her issues regarding the body dysmorphia, which I think is very important for her to actually feel like she actually has a reason to be here other than just literally just being there just to fill screen time. Kinger, you know, even though Kinger is not fully transparent in regards to what he knows about the circus, him being present kind of provides a light for the characters, which I think is very important for whatever direction the ending of the show goes to. Him being there and him having gotten the characters to actually enjoy the adventure for a short amount of time, I think is very crucial, you know? It's because of him that Pomni started to have fun actually cooking up some patties and actually enjoying a 9-to-5, which gives meaning to a stagnant life. You know, now you have meaning in this boring job. You had a coworker like Kinger that actually made things fun, actually made things enjoyable, and actually made doing this job worthwhile, because at the end of it, you know, you had a good time, you enjoyed yourself. And I think that's a good lesson to learn, and that you can't let the negative people affect you. People are going to have their own issues, but it shouldn't let you hold yourself down, you know? Like, the negativity of how people treat you shouldn't let that hold you down from how you treat yourself. I think that could be a very good lesson for Pomni to learn from Kinger by the end of the episode, and just in general going forward in regards to like all the things that are going to happen, like how Pomni's going to begin to form a friendship with Jax. And then the same thing with Ragatha, you know, instead of having Ragatha be showcased in a negative light, you know, you have her insecurities here about how she feels about people being abused or pushed over, and utilize that for the purpose of the story, you know, with her feeling like Jax is constantly being a nuisance, but she also can see how Jax's influence is beginning to corrupt Gangle a little bit because he's constantly bullying her, and so now she's beginning to lash out, and she can see kind of like how that's beginning to cause a negative ripple effect, which plays into her actually being drunk and high for a reason, you know. Now there's a reason for why she gets drunk and high, not just only for Caine's Spudsy storyline, but also for Gangle, you know, being more genuine, being more straightforward about how she feels about Gangle becoming more and more corrupt with that mask, which is something that was, again, established in the original episode 4, but nothing became of it. Once again, it just was relegated to, oh, you're annoying, Gangle, and then Gangle wanted to jump into oncoming traffic, but it wasn't justified, you know. Here, it's justified. If Gangle wants to jump into oncoming traffic, it actually feels like she actually wanted to kill herself here, because now she genuinely feels like she hurt everybody. I mean, she abused her power, she punished Ragatha, and that caused like a ripple effect. That caused a ripple effect of her harming her friend because of how this person that's been harming her has constantly been making her feel. So when she lashed out at Jax, she also at the same time lashed out at Ragatha, who was her friend, and so now that causes like a ripple between the two, where you're not going to really see Ragatha and Gangle being completely on good terms with each other going into episode 5, which I believe, now that I've gotten through my booking for episode 4, we should get to. So now we discuss episode 5 of the Amazing Digital Circus, Untitled. Now, I don't hate this one nearly as much as I do episode 4, because episode 4 just had a ton of character flaws, story plot lines that contradicted each other, and then of course the wasted potential that was the storyline altogether, with all the various storylines not getting paid off, all the character development not getting paid off. Here in episode 5, I don't hate it nearly as much because it doesn't really have anything going for it. But that's the problem that I have with the episode. It doesn't have anything going for it. This entire episode is actually actually the definition of a filler. You know, for a show that's all about character development, you would think that the show would actually develop its characters. Well, this entire episode barely does the bare minimum of that, and instead wastes our time with a bunch of lightning round adventures submitted by the characters, where we don't actually even get to enjoy the adventures because they get skipped through so quickly that we don't even get a chance to dive in to the enjoyment that these characters would actually have had they been able to actually participate within those adventures. In Poacher's Paradise, we immediately skip through that one because the characters don't want to play Jax's game. In President Pomni, we don't accomplish anything in that one, except for foreshadowing, I guess, episode 7 with the red and the blue. In the anime, we immediately skip through that because Jax doesn't want to participate, and instead he decides to blackmail Gangle in order to skip through it. In Stargazing, we get only a slight little tease in regards to Ragatha's friendship with Jax and Jax's prior friendship with Rivet, and then we have a whole intermission sequence, which, don't worry, I will get to that. And then you go to a bar scene where all the characters just get to dump all of their feelings, all their backstories, all of that, just because it's a bar, and so we gotta, you know, play into the theme of the bar, you know, okay, we just gonna exploit, you know, how we got here, how did you get here, okay, how did you get here, okay, what was your life like, and we just go through all that cliche bullshit. And then we go to the softball adventure, which is supposed to be like the big adventure within this episode, but it's tampered entirely by Caine and lacks any actual entertaining, exciting feel because it's not treated as a softball adventure. In fact, it's treated like, I don't even know how to describe how this adventure is treated. It doesn't even feel like it has any kind of impact whatsoever. The characters barely want to participate within the adventure. And the evil big tops, you know, the most interesting thing about the adventure, we don't even get to utilize them to their fullest potential, which is, again, more wasted potential that frustrates me. Not as much as the humiliation ritual that Ragatha had to go through in what was supposed to be her episode, her centric episode, but you would be forgiven of not knowing that because the episode barely utilizes Ragatha in her own episode. And if you're gonna make the argument, well, Ragatha's big moment with the softball adventure, that was her episode. Brother, hello, everybody else got their own personal adventures too.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home?
Jax got 2, by the way. Furthermore, further solidifying my belief on the writer's favorite thing there. But Gangle got the anime, Jax got Poacher's Paradise, President Pomni, Zooble got the bar, and Kinger allegedly got Stargazing. So Ragatha's big softball adventure doesn't stand out here as anything more significant than the other adventures we did. But I guess because the other adventures we didn't do a whole lot of fuck all with them, that this adventure was supposed to seem like it was a bigger deal. But it wasn't treated as a bigger deal because there was no stakes at hand with this big adventure. None of the characters wanted to really participate in the softball, and when we got to see them participate, they barely got to play or have any kind of excitement whatsoever. There was no excitement, no build around this softball adventure that could make it feel any special. You know, it didn't feel special, it didn't feel entertaining, it didn't feel energizing, nothing. This softball adventure just went by and just made Ragatha look worse than she already had been made to look. I mean, Ragatha was supposed to have her big episode this episode. Like, everyone else got their big episode. Zooble and Kinger got their episodes in episode 3, and the entire episode almost revolved around those two specifically. Episode 4 entirely revolved around Gangle, which was one of my complaints in regards to how it just completely negated Pomni altogether. Episode 6 entirely focuses on Jax and his character. Episode 2 entirely focused on Pomni and her character. But then episode 5, we don't get Ragatha entirely focused on in this episode, despite it being her episode. And I feel like that's a little bit disrespectful to Ragatha's character, no? Especially considering that the big moment where Ragatha has like a blowout towards Jax is what turned a lot of the fan base against her, apparently, which to me makes absolutely no sense because in the literal previous episode, at the start of the previous episode, she literally had the same kind of blowout with Jax in the episode, but for some reason this is the one that everyone turned against her with. I guess because she revealed a little bit about her backstory, how she was abused as a kid, but that don't make sense. So why would you? I don't know, bro. This episode in totality just offered nothing but just making Ragatha's character look worse and forcing this storyline with Ragatha where she's like very isolated, even though you didn't have to force that storyline. This is one of those examples where when the show creator or like a storyteller, right, finally decides to focus in on this particular story that had been going on for prior episodes beforehand, and then for some reason when they finally decide to focus in on this storyline, they ruin it and make it seem a lot weirder and worse for wear, where you actually root for the character within the context that you're not supposed to root for in this situation. Like, for example, in all the previous episodes, Ragatha was clearly being showcased to be isolated away from all the other characters because of her positivity, where she would go through tons and tons of hell but barely get any kind of support during any of those episodes. Episode 1, she got torn apart by Kaufmo. Episode 2, Jax just kept fucking around with her specifically. Episode 3, she had her big moment, but for some reason it was off screen because we can't have Jax looking bad on camera.
But wait a minute, Eric. We got Jax looking bad in this episode where he gets to wear a dress.
Oh, don't worry. I'm gonna get there. Just hold off for a second. Let me just keep doing my thing, okay? I will get back to that. And then in episode 4, she gets thrown into a deep fryer and nobody helps her, not even once for a second. And then is like entirely drunk or high for the entire episode, where Zooble just decides to finally like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be a good person all of a sudden, and decide to help Ragatha despite the fact that I'm more interested and concerned about Gangle. So I don't know why I would uncharacteristically help Ragatha in this situation over than Gangle. I don't know. It's just so weird. And then this episode, where it's supposed to like showcase how isolated Ragatha is, they try so hard to like make it seem like Ragatha's so isolated, but in trying so hard to make Ragatha seem isolated, they actually showcase how she's not isolated, how characters like Kinger has her back and is supporting her, how characters like Gangle still get inspiration from her because of how she hit that home run within the softball adventure. But you would be forgiven on not knowing that Gangle hit the home run because they fucking don't show that either, which is another one of my problems, which I will get back to that later. Don't worry, all this comes full circle. It will come back around and I'll talk all about it. But in trying so hard to make Ragatha seem isolated, they showcase how she's not isolated, which makes the ending of this episode even weirder, how Ragatha is just suddenly seemingly isolated when she's not isolated. It's like, a good example that I could explain is what they tried to do in The Walking Dead, the Telltale Walking Dead series. In the Telltale Walking Dead series, Kenny in the first season would be pretty much like a jackass to you if you sided against him one time throughout the entire adventure, right? If you went against his word at any point within the adventure, he would always hold some petty little bullshit against you, where he would be like so angry at you, petty with you, almost let you die numerous times throughout the entire first season of the Telltale series. And it'd be like, bro, what the fuck is your problem?
Lee, man, you know I care about Clementine, and I am a Christian man, but I keep asking myself, if this was me, asking you for help, asking you to put your life on the line, would you be there for me? Because there've been plenty of times when you ain't been.
Is this And then when they finally go and explore that story in the second season of like, Kenny's got some problems, Kenny got some issues, right? You know, like what's wrong with Kenny? When they finally decide to explore that in the second season, they try so hard to make Kenny seem like a bad guy, but in doing that, they actually showcase him to be the most protective and the most fucking knowledgeable character of them all within the second season, to where you don't hate him at all and you side with him.
Where's the kid? Jane, where is he?
He's...
No. No!
No, not again. Not again.
No matter what happens, just stay out of it.
How could you let this happen?
You have to trust me. You're gonna see what he really is.
What?
So it's like, what the like, it doesn't make any sense. We had the perfect reason why we would not want to side with Kenny from season 1, because Kenny flat out, if you refuse to be nice to Kenny in season 1, he would flat out choose to not help Clementine at all in the first season. So then in the second season, that would be like perfect reasoning as to why Clementine would be pissed at him. It's like, when you were supposed to try and help me, you never came. You never tried to help me one time. It would have made perfect sense. But for some fucking reason, in season 2, Kenny does literally everything in his power to protect us and keep us safe no matter what, and we're supposed to see him as a bad guy to the point where we have to shoot him later. Yeah, no. It's the same thing here in Digital Circus, where all the previous episodes showcase how Ragatha was easily an isolated character because of her positivity, and yet the episode that's supposed to showcase that very storyline showcases how Ragatha's not actually isolated and has a lot of people that actually care about her and support her, which makes no fucking sense because that destroys the entire storyline that you're building here and makes the ending of this episode even weirder when Ragatha is seemingly all alone, despite the fact that she's not all alone. She has characters like Kinger, who cares about her. She has characters like Gangle, who looks up to her. And she has Pomni, who's supposed to be her best friend in this situation. Hell, in the very next episode, the first person that approaches Ragatha is Pomni, being like, hey, you want to be on my team? You would think on a narrative storytelling basis that the easiest thing to do throughout this episode is to showcase how every time that Ragatha tries to help the characters, she ends up failing to help them all together. Like, for example, instead of having Gangle hit a home run, she fails miserably because Ragatha's teachings failed her. Or every time that Ragatha tries to help Pomni during like a situation like the President Pomni has an issue with it every single time. It's like complaining, like, shut the fuck up, Ragatha, I'm trying to do this thing. Like when she's cutting the wire. Like, you had so many opportunities to actually showcase how Ragatha can easily be isolated away from the characters due to her positivity, but instead you do the opposite, which destroys the entire point of this episode and the entire point of Ragatha's character going into the next episode. And that's the kind of fucking shit that I don't understand. It's like you didn't have to force anything with Ragatha in this episode. All you had to do was reestablish what we already knew. For example, the whole thing with Gangle wouldn't have to be a problem if it wasn't for the fact that Gangle's problems weren't solved already in the previous episode, except they weren't solved for some reason and we had to do it again in episode 6, but in this episode, episode 5, she's completely relegated to the background, which makes no sense, because if Gangle, like, let's say for example, if episode 4 went exactly the way that I wanted it to go, right, and Gangle ended up at the end of this episode depressed, and in episode 5 she's just entirely down in the dumps, not wanting to talk with anybody, not wanting to socialize with anybody, Ragatha could try to help her throughout the entire episode, and then her trying to help her is what ultimately ends up making Gangle lose her sanity even more and pushing her away even more. And that could have been a perfect way to isolate Ragatha even more, you know, using one character to develop the other character stories. You know, for a show that's all about character development, you would think that they actually know how to develop their fucking characters. I gotta keep saying that because it's so obvious and yet so overlooked too. Like, how do you overlook something so simple?
Simple. He's speaking facts.
So let's get into the character conversations, right? Let's talk about the characters throughout this episode. Let's start with Gangle. What does Gangle do this episode? Fuck all. Yep, that's pretty much it. So here's what we learned about Gangle. We learned that she worked at a fast food joint and that she draws anime. Sound familiar? Oh yeah, that's right, because we literally learned that in the previous episode. But don't worry, she also gets her own personal anime episode where Jax gets to blackmail her with the figurine incident, and we get to skip that anime episode, which I don't mind because I do not like anime whatsoever. You see, I have quite the aversion of anime, but you know what? At least, I'll say this much, at least that episode, if it was its own centric episode, like if all of these adventures were their own personal centric episodes, that would have been far more entertaining than this episode going through just them in a short time span without actually accomplishing anything. I would have much preferred that because we would have actually had more entertainment, more fun character development to utilize by utilizing the worlds that we go to. You know, all the things that Gooseworx thinks are filler, and yet here we are with yet another filler episode where we don't really accomplish much of anything and instead actually harm the story even further. I don't even know how that's possible. I mean, Gangle literally sits out every other time. Yeah, that's right. Gangle doesn't do anything else. She had the figurine incident, and then she revealed that she worked at a fast food joint and draws manga. And that's it. That's literally it. Everything else, Gangle doesn't do anything. Poacher's Paradise, she's just Jax's dummy to shoot. President Pomni, she's just the bomb. Stargazing, she gets a sandwich from Zooble and they immediately cut away, and it's just like, well, Jax is just like, you really think that Gangle can be happy, even though that Gangle is happy, but for some reason she's not gonna be happy next episode? Bad storytelling. Can't stand it. And then in the bar, we learned the same thing that we already knew about Gangle. And then in the softball, where you would think Gangle would have a big moment hitting this home run, we cut away from Gangle entirely. In fact, to add more insult to injury, Gangle doesn't even get an evil clone. Because apparently Gooseworx thought it would be a funny gag, or if my theory turns out to actually be correct, it might play into the idea that Caine might think that Gangle is an NPC later on in the story and is going to end up accidentally deleting Gangle from existence.
Montez, stop talking.
talking.
But that's only if my theory comes to be true. If my theory doesn't actually turn out to be true regards to episode 8 and 9, that means that that whole sequence with Gangle not getting an evil clone was literally for no reason, other than just for a funny gag. And it makes no sense, because don't you think that you can utilize that to develop the character to make her feel even more insecure and isolated, considering the fact that she didn't get an evil clone but everybody else did? I don't know. Maybe that's just me looking into the actual potential of the show. I would think that you would actually utilize Gangle after having an entire episode where she was the main centric star, but I guess not. Gangle is also, I guess, the reason why Jax gets a maid outfit, because she votes for it. You know, she calls for a vote, and then when she gets chased around by Jax, guess who decides to help her? Oh yeah, that's right, nobody. Oh, Zooble, you useless piece of shit. Yeah, just stand there and watch Jax try to fucking tear Gangle to pieces, why don't you? You're definitely a good friend, Zooble. I can't stand fucking Zooble, bro. Dude, Pomni was more willing to stand up to Jax from Ragatha just yelling at him than Zooble was to stop Jax from trying to chase down Gangle and do whatever the fuck he was gonna do to her. That don't make no goddamn sense. I'm sorry. Zooble, you wanna say that you care about Gangle, and yet all the times where you get a chance to prove that you actually care about Gangle, you don't do anything! You don't do anything, you useless piece of shit. What does Zooble do in this episode? Let's talk about it. What does Zooble do in this episode? Zooble angsts in the Poacher's Paradise about Jax's adventure. She angsts in the President Pomni about it being Jax's adventure. She just tells Jax to, like, yo, shut up in the anime episode because she knows it's Gangle's, and I guess she wanted Gangle to enjoy it, but that's all she did. And then in Stargazing, she gives Gangle a sandwich. Yeah, that's the extent of that. She interferes with Caine in the Intermission, which, thank you, Zooble. At least you finally did something of use by having some common sense, which I will talk about that fucking intermission soon enough. And then in the bar, we revealed that Zooble was once a bartender and a tattoo artist, which I guess is a stereotype in some ways. I don't know to what exactly, but apparently there was a lot of insinuations in regards to Jax's comments. I don't know. Completely went over my head, because I am not cultured enough to know what the fuck they are talking about. And then in the softball adventure, Zooble, I guess, manages to hit the ball into her evil clone's face, and yeah, that's about it. She complains to Caine, and that's it. So, what did Zooble accomplish in this episode? What riveting character development did Zooble get in this episode? Because to me, it seems like we just got the same thing we always get with Zooble, and we didn't progress anything. You know, we spent episode 3 focusing so much on Zooble's body dysmorphia, and yet we don't actually ever focus on Zooble's body dysmorphia. Like, we never once see or showcase how Zooble feels insecure about it. Like, we have Zooble's evil clone here, Zooble, which is clearly like very stupid, very dumb, is supposed to be an insult to Zooble, and yet Zooble just hits a ball into her face and that wraps that up. So we got literally like 10 seconds of Zooble actually having a legitimate conflict within the episode, and that was it. Everything else is just Jax being Jax and her hating Jax and her hating Caine. You know, the same thing we have already gotten from Zooble's character. Riveting character development. Yes, this is the kind of character development that I love, where we get to do a whole lot of nothing and repeat the same things over and over again, because this is totally not the definition of a filler, Gooseworx. We definitely couldn't have gotten an actual full-fledged softball adventure that would have been far more entertaining and far more riveting than this. Dude, one of my favorite movies of all time is literally Sandlot. And yes, I know that's baseball, not softball, not the same thing, but dude, how can I enjoy an entire 90-minute movie about kids playing baseball more than an actual 5 to 6 minute segment of these characters playing a softball game? Like, come the fuck on. You have all these possibilities of what you could do throughout this adventure, and you do nothing with it. How? It's so easy. And don't worry, I'm gonna show you how easy it is when I get to my booking, because there is a very big, obvious thing that would have made this episode far more entertaining. But, you know, I'm still getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's get to Kinger. Oh wait, never mind. Let's not get to Kinger, because Kinger doesn't do anything! Again! Again. How does this happen? Again. 2 episodes straight. Kinger doesn't do fuck all. What do you mean? He came off of episode 3, white, fucking hot, and you're telling me another episode goes by where he doesn't do anything. What?
My stock is dropping rapidly in the eyes of the casual viewer.
I don't understand. He was in President Pomni and was like a funny little gag for that one adventure, barely does anything in the other adventures, and then at the softball one, he's supposed to be the coach, but he barely coaches. I mean, yeah, he had that one iconic line, which I will say. That one iconic line. If this softball adventure was actually taken seriously and it was actually treated with respect and was actually showcased and displayed to be something of importance, then I would have loved that Kinger line because it would have actually made it feel more impactful.
All right, team. I may not know what's going on, or who is going on, or when is going on, or why is going on, but I do know where is going on. And it's out on that field, so let's go break some tailbones, team.
You know what? That could have been something had this episode been something, but it wasn't. And so, you know, Kinger has a celebration with Ragatha, and his development again amounts to 0. You have a character who has all the backstory, all the exposition in him there. He's literally there, and you don't do anything. How do you, again, 2 episodes straight, don't do anything with this character? Why are you holding off so long on the character that you came off with in episode 3, white fucking hot? You would think that with a character with that much momentum, that much praise, would get so much screen time, so much time to actually be developed and showcase what he's capable of. But they don't use him. Goose doesn't use him. I don't know why he doesn't use him, but he just doesn't. I don't know. Why? I literally am going to tell you exactly how you could have easily fixed this problem. So I don't know how it was complete oversight, how you just overlooked Kinger again for 2 episodes straight now, does nothing, accomplishes nothing, doesn't develop anything as a character. You would think that a show that's all about character development, you would actually develop your characters, and yet here you have Kinger who doesn't change from this episode, from the prior episode to the next episode. So what are we doing? 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 Genuinely, what are we doing with Kinger's character? Why are we holding off so long with Kinger's character? Why are we only doing little tiny teases with Kinger's character? This was literally what I was bitching about in episode 7 when I was reacting to it. That was the main thing that I was like freaking out about. It's like, why are we only doing this now? We had all this time to do this. We had 9 full episodes to work with, and yet somehow we skipped 3 whole episodes where we could have had development with Kinger's character, and we just waited till episode 7 to finally do something. And then all of a sudden he has a moment, scratch, the first abstraction. Like, bro, what am I supposed to take away from that information when you didn't develop this character at all?
I remember C&A. I worked for them. We didn't make games. We were just developing artificial intelligence, specifically creative AI, the kind that could come up with its own ideas and create things within the program. Caine was our first semi-successful attempt at that. I can't remember what we originally called him, but no, he was one of my greatest achievements as a programmer.
Oh man, Kinger might have something to do with the backstory of this fucking circus. No fucking shit! No shit! You had all this time to do something with that and you didn't do anything. We learned this in episode 3. Episode 3. What have we been doing since episode 3? A whole lot of fuck all with Kinger, apparently. Because apparently the show is all about characters. The character development. Fuck the story. Mutually exclusive. This is a character development show. 95% character development. Dude, you still need a story to develop your characters, because otherwise, why the fuck would we care about characters that don't have a story? Don't you get it? That's why they can't be mutually exclusive.
Seriously? Seriously?
You can't have them be mutually exclusive. You can't do 95% character development if there's nothing to the story. If you only have 5% story development, why the fuck should we care about these characters? Why the fuck should I care about Kinger other than he has good lessons here and there if he's not going to actually use those lessons? If we're not actually going to see those lessons in progress? If we're not actually going to learn anything about his backstory in regards to the actual story of the circus? I don't understand. Why is Kinger's character here then? What are we doing with his character? If we're not going to do anything with him, shit, you might as well sit him out again, because that's what you did in the previous episode, right? You had nothing for him, so you sat him out, even though he could have been really good use in episode 4 in regards to the lesson being taught in that episode with Pomni. But no, you didn't do that. So you have another chance here to do a lesson, and you don't do it again. And Kinger, once again, for a second time, does a whole lot of fuck all. Should we talk about the big three now? Yeah, I think it's about time we talk about the big three. The big three, let's get to Jax, Pomni, and Ragatha. Who should I start with? Should I start with Ragatha because this is supposed to be her episode and that she doesn't get to do a whole lot of anything? Like I said already, this episode should have been about how it showcased Ragatha to be isolated, except that this episode does the opposite and yet still wants to continue with that storyline, despite the fact that that storyline doesn't make any sense anymore because you already showcased how she's not isolated. So I don't understand why we still gotta go with this narrative that she is, despite the fact that she's not. And to be completely honest, this whole thing with like Ragatha being jealous of Pomni, being friends with Jax, is so contrived and forced. Like throughout the entire episode, Pomni has never once showcased that she actually liked Jax. She constantly complained to Jax, literally stated in the anime one that she, remembering the fact that he threw her into a moving truck, and then showcased throughout the other adventures like stargazing, like how she finds his humiliation funny when he tries to explain that he's the pinnacle of masculinity, and she's like, he's looking around for his tail like a fucking dog, and she's laughing at him because he looks stupid and ridiculous. And then in the bar scene, she's fucking hates the fact that he's touching her, hates the fact that he's like getting all close and comfy with her, is literally uncomfortable, and it's clear as day. But for some reason, Ragatha is supposed to take it wrong, and Ragatha is supposed to look at that and feel like she's losing Pomni to corruption? What? You know, when I saw Ragatha making that face, I thought the reason that she was making that face was because Jax was just doing all this weird shit to Pomni. Like, he's touching her, he's fucking holding her, all this shit. And, you know, considering that Ragatha came from an alleged abused household with her mother, I would think that Ragatha would be like, yo, cut that shit out with Pomni or something. But no. For some reason, Ragatha decides that she's just gonna go down memory lane. Hey, Pomni, remember that time I got destroyed by Kaufmo? Yeah, because... What? Wait. It doesn't, in context, it doesn't even make sense. Like, what was her attempt there? Like, was it supposed to be, like, a funny humiliation at her own expense? It just makes Ragatha look so weird. Like, Ragatha's not weird. Why are you making her look weird? I don't understand. Why are you sabotaging this character so much? Why? Is it because it's the writer's least favorite? Which is a thing, too, by the way. There are writers who have a least favorite character as well, who, for some reason, they decide to sabotage and bully throughout the entire episode. Yes, I don't know why. I couldn't even explain it to you even if I wanted to, but yeah, there are shows and stories that legitimately do that for no reason. Like, you'll have a character that you genuinely would love and want to see developed, and then for some reason that character gets punished over and over and over again for literally no reason other than the fact that the writer doesn't like them and might as well fuck that character. And I don't get it.
I don't get that. I don't get that.
And then this episode ends so egregiously. So Ragatha begins to suspect and think that the entire reason why Pomni decided to give her a chance to play softball wasn't because Pomni was actually trying to be nice, but was actually instead the idea that Pomni just wanted to spend more time with Jax, which is not completely true. Pomni just did not want to play softball, so she decided to give Ragatha her turn, which she explains in the next episode. But, you know, the insinuation here is that Pomni just wanted Ragatha to fuck off so that she could just be with Jax. And at the end of the episode here, we have this super fucking weird exchange where Jax goes, attacks his evil self by, I guess, chomping on him because it's supposed to be funny, but Pomni seems to find it funny. Ragatha looks at her, like, gives her this look. Pomni looks up and she's like, oh shit, And then Ragatha just looks, and then they cut away. Can I tell you how much I hate that? Where it's like, just because you cut away from the fucking scene, that I'm not meant to believe that the characters didn't have some kind of form of communication. It's the same thing of like, you ever see in a story where like the characters will go in a car and drive somewhere, and for some reason they could have had this conversation of like setting up a plan during the car ride of what they're gonna do, but for some reason, no, we gotta skip ahead to when the car actually arrives at the scene, and then when they arrive at the scene, that's when they decide to devise a plan, even though they could have devised a plan in the car and had ample amount of time to actually figure something out. Yeah, it's essentially that, but here. And don't worry, it's not the first time that I've seen this either, because I've seen this in literally my favorite show of all time, Spectacular Spider-Man, in the second season, which I'm not as much of a fan of as the first season. You see, season 1 is pitch perfection, 10 out of 10. Season 2, not so much, but you know, I still love season 2. But there's this ongoing thing that happens in season 2 where Peter Parker has gotta tell Gwen how he feels about her. And there are constant moments throughout the season where he has a perfect opportunity to finally talk to Gwen. And then for some reason, something happens that completely cuts off their communication. And I'm not meant to believe for a second of a doubt that some couple of minutes or couple of hours later that they're not gonna have the same conversation. Like, what? There's a full scene in episode 3, I think Reinforcements, where Peter is on the ice and he's about to talk to Gwen about how he feels, and then Captain Stacy just kind of yells out into the ether, "He's gone!" to insinuate like one of the villains escaped. And then it completely cuts away, as if Peter didn't have that conversation after Captain George Stacy yelled out that he's gone. Like, what? Were you not about to have a conversation with Gwen on the ice right then and there? What happened? Like, what? I hate when fucking stories do that. Like, am I not meant to believe that these characters didn't talk to each other? Like, and it's not even the first time that Digital Circus does this. Digital Circus literally does this in episode 6 too, where it's like Pomni and Ragatha come across each other. They're like, hey, let's talk later. You know, yeah, sounds good. And then they don't talk later.
What the hell are you talking about?
What? But I wanted to see that conversation. You know, for a show that's all about character development, you would think they'd actually develop their characters. But no, you know, a meaningful scene between Pomni and Ragatha actually expressing their feelings about what's going on between them in episode 6, yeah, we don't need that scene, but we totally need the scene where Gangle has an identity crisis again, despite the fact that we solved that in episode 4, and yet she has it again for some reason in episode 6 where it doesn't make any fucking sense, and Zooble has to have a full-on conversation with her that I don't give a fuck about, because Zooble has been one of the reasons why Gangle is in the position to begin with. Well, I don't know. Yeah, this show picks and chooses its moments, as you can clearly see. We'll have therapy scenes like Zooble and Gangle, but not therapy scenes like Ragatha and Pomni, which are far more investing on a story level. I don't know. You gotta love the booking, because the booking is so fucking good, right? I'm supposed to praise this show and say that it's fantastic. Now, this isn't like me bashing like indie projects, or like, oh man, indie projects are so horrible. Like, no, this has nothing to do with it. This is just me pointing out flaws and terrible episodes in a show that's supposed to be good, but for some reason has bad episodes like this that ruins the entire experience, because now I can't watch this show without realizing that, oh wait a minute, we have to go through that one section of the show where for some reason they try to force storylines that didn't work because of the way that they kept paying them off was so poorly done and poorly executed that I can't watch it because it's that bad. I'm supposed to meant to believe that Ragatha is isolating all alone, as if Ragatha and Pomni couldn't have had a conversation right then and there, when clearly Ragatha was irritated about something and Pomni could have easily been like, hey Ragatha, is everything alright? And then Ragatha could have explained like, well, you know, did you deliberately choose to not participate in the softball because you wanted to spend time with Jax? Like, are you telling me that would have not been an interesting, fun scene? Are you telling me that would have not have developed their characters in an interesting way, developed the story in an interesting way? Like, why did we cut away from that? Why did they just go back to the circus and all of a sudden Jack's like, hey Pomni, I want to show you something in the back room over here. Oh yeah, sure. And they just walk off like they're friends. Like, dude, y'all are barely friends. What are we talking about? Oh, by the way, here we go. We might as well talk about Pomni Jax. The only reason these two motherfuckers are friends is because Pomni literally sees Jax hanging out with the evil version of her. I wish I was lying. I'm not lying. I wish I was making it up. I'm not making it up. That is actually the only reason why Pomni befriends Jax. The only reason throughout this entire episode, Pomni is clearly uncomfortable around Jax, clearly bothered by Jax, clearly sees that Jax has issues and complications with himself, like he's afraid of fucking corn, the weirdo. But now all of a sudden, during the softball adventure, Pomni is all cool and fine with Jax enough to have a conversation with him. But I'm led to believe, oh, the reason why Pomni's cool with Jax all of a sudden is because Pomni's taking Kinger's advice and making sure that nobody feels left out. But like, dude, she was bothered by him throughout this entire episode. She disliked the fact that he was fucking around with her in President Pomni. He was fucking around with her in the fucking anime. I mean, like, she was literally like, you threw me into a moving truck. Why would you say that to somebody that you seemingly like? You don't say that to somebody that you like. You say that to somebody that you don't like to make sure that they fuck off. Yo, dude, you threw me into a moving truck. Shut the fuck up trying to talk to me. And guess what Jax was trying to talk with Pomni about? Jax was trying to talk with Pomni about making fun of Gangle, which is literally what he ends up doing at the softball adventure once again. And this time, Ragatha actually says something. So you're telling me Ragatha doesn't say anything in the anime one, but she says something in the softball one, and that's where everybody throws a fit, making it seem like Ragatha's in the wrong. Dude, Jax literally in the same episode tried to make fun of Gangle numerous times, or try to get Pomni to talk about Gangle numerous times. In the anime one, the first person Jax talks to about calling Gangle a dweeb, but he doesn't say dweeb because he thinks it's gonna out himself about him actually liking anime, because he does. It's clear as day, dude. You suck. You're a fucking loser. You're a fucking dweeb, Jax. And then Ragatha doesn't say anything. And then in the next adventure, Jax is talking with Pomni in the stargazing, clearly once again trying to spark up conversation about Gangle, being like, do you think Gangle's actually capable of being happy? You know, like trying to spark up some negative conversation. And then once again, later on in the bar scene, Jax is like trying to gaslight Ragatha into making her seem like she is the reason why Gangle wanted to kill herself. It's like, oh, didn't you tell Gangle that she should kill herself? Even though that the only thing, as I showcased multiple times, the only thing that Ragatha actually said to Gangle was just,
no offense, but you're kind of annoying when you have your happy mask.
And she even said no offense at the beginning of her sentence too. So I don't know where this whole idea of like Ragatha saying that Gangle should kill herself came from, when if anything, what Jax said was far more closer to him saying that Gangle should kill herself.
I like you better when you're sad.
So he prefers when she's depressed and down in the dumps. And yet when we finally get to the softball and Ragatha, you know, after seeing this 3 different times in the episode of Jax trying to cause some spark, bullying on Gangle, trying to be like, yeah, Gangle fucking sucks. It's like, oh yeah, look, Gangle's up to bat. Do you think she's gonna fucking strike out right away type shit? And then Ragatha finally is like, dude, stop. Like, at some point, can you just shut the fuck up? And she finally kind of loses her cool. And yet this is the moment where everybody turns against her. My God, are you guys that fucking soft? I'm sorry, I have to say it because it's fucking ridiculous how you turn against Ragatha for finally doing something that Zooble even couldn't do. Zooble sat there, watched Jax chase around Gangle, did a whole lot of fuck all because she's a useless character, and yet Ragatha finally says something to Jax. Is like, dude, stop trying to make Pomni like you do. Stop trying to like make her enjoy Gangle's suffering just because you like it. And she finally kind of blows up.
Oh my God. Enough!
By the way, this was immediately after Pomni was like,
not to like agree with Jax or anything, but there's nothing wrong with showing your negative emotions. It's pretty normal.
And yet, the very second that Ragatha finally expresses negative emotions, everybody's against her.
Okay, let's, like, calm down a bit.
Like, what are you talking about? This is Kenny from The Walking Dead Telltale all over again, dude. It's the same thing. It's the same thing! Like, why? Why? You really expect me to turn against this character when this character is doing everything in her power to fucking be nice race to do everything right. Like, I don't see anybody else trying. Zooble, who's seemingly Gangle's new best friend, hasn't done shit for Gangle. Like, and I'm supposed to believe that they're friends? Let me ask you a question. If your friend was being chased around by some bully that clearly wanted to fucking beat her ass up, wouldn't you go over to that son of a bitch and bitch slap him across the face or punch him in the gut or something? Do something about that? Zooble just watched it happen. Like, oh no, Gangle, run away. You can get away. Like, what? Are you serious? What is this show, dude? Apparently, Gooseworx also likes to make fun of the audience's intelligence by saying like, oh man, only dumb people. This show was made for dumb people.
It's your word against yours. Huh?
No, yeah, you're really solidifying your case, aren't you there? See, I wouldn't go as far as to insult my own audience to that degree. Granted, I have done that here on this platform before, but that was because of justified reasons. Like, for example, you guys not fucking watching the videos that I work hours on.
Just kidding.
I digress. You know, everyone has their own opinions on what they actually want to watch or not. But needless to say, what I'm trying to say is that Ragatha finally does something to stand up for Gangle, and in the process also like, dude, Jax, leave Pomni alone. She's clearly uncomfortable around you. But I guess Pomni doesn't really have much to say in that because Pomni's like, well, I could take care of myself too, you know? Which, you know, understandable from Pomni's part. But like, if I'm meant to believe in this situation that Ragatha is in any way in the wrong, oh man, I don't even want to see what most of you would do in real life. I really don't. Like, this is light work. This is literally the definition of light work. An argument? Oh man. Arguments happen all the time, you know. Taking accountability. Ragatha takes accountability, by the way. She apologizes to Jax despite the fact she clearly didn't want it because she fucking hates that son of a bitch. I don't blame her. But I didn't hear Jax's apology. Where was Jax's apology for being a jackass? Oh wait, he didn't apologize because for some reason I'm supposed to care more about Jax and his feelings over Ragatha's feelings in the episode that's supposed to be centered around Ragatha. Yay. Isn't this great? Isn't this fun? Ah, man, isn't the Amazing Digital Circus such a good show? No. You know, as much as I can enjoy certain episodes here and there with Digital Circus, my god, when they miss, they fucking miss, bro. This shit is so bad. And you know what's even more disappointing is that this entire exchange is what ends up leading Pomni to have more conversations with Jax after seeing that Jax was having a good time with evil Pomni, so clearly she knows that Jax is interested in her, and then they just become friends all of a sudden. And you know why this is such a slap to the face? Because everybody who was like from the beginning, like they had this ship in their mind, this whole thing called Funny Bunny, where Jax and Pomni was like this perfect duo in their mind, and they couldn't wait to see how Pomni and Jax would be friends and be in a relationship or some kind of thing that would happen later in the show. And the reward that they get was such a terribly contrived way to have these two become friends that I don't even believe that they are friends. You know what? Everything that Jax said in episode 6, I completely believe it. I believe it, because if you thought for a second that I thought that these two would be friends, you thought wrong, because I don't know how these two even got to a conversation to actually enjoying each other's company. That's how bad this was done. That's how bad this whole exchange, this whole friendship was performed. And you know why that's so frustrating is because after witnessing fans and what they have been able to create and what they've been able to accomplish, I have seen so many of these so-called funny bunny comics where these characters actually are like really close friends or have this very personal, deep connection. And I swear to you, all of them are infinitely better than the actual show's display of these two characters together. Now, granted, I know that that's not the actual real versions of Pomni and Jax. You know, Gooseworx has his own personal view of these two characters and his own depiction of these two characters. So, you know, Funny Bunny was never actually gonna be a thing. But it's crazy to me how I can see fans do far more with that potential than the actual show creator. Usually, if the fans are able to create a better storyline between two characters than the actual show creator, that's usually a sign that the storyline with those two characters in the actual show is kind of bad. Because most times when there's supposed to be like fan-made storylines that are based off the shows, it's usually that the show is so good with the two characters that then the fans make a storyline continuing off of what the show has already established. But the show never actually established these two characters being friends until this episode, where it was very contrived that these two even became friends to begin with, which makes it all the more ironic how all these fanfics of these two characters coming together was far better and displayed the storyline better. If I had watched a fanfic before watching episode 7 or episode 6 even, like if I had watched one of those fanfic stories before 6 or 7, I'd totally feel like the relationship between Jax and Pomni would be far more impactful and far more investing. But because the actual show doesn't actually dive into that, when we get to episode 6 and we have this big blowout between Pomni and Jax, I don't feel nearly as much care between these two characters because they never had a friendship to begin with, and yet Pomni believed that they did. But I'm sitting here having watched the show thinking to myself, you guys barely had a friendship and I'm supposed to believe that Pomni's gonna get worked up over this, that Jax is gonna get worked up over this because he cares about Pomni? Like, dude, y'all barely cared about each other, but seemingly cared about each other personally on a deep connection. Like, where the fuck was this? I never saw this in the show. I saw moments where Jax is constantly trying to talk to Pomni, so if he has a deep connection to Pomni, then he's just a fucking weirdo. But Pomni having a deep connection to Jax, I don't know where the fuck she got that from. And let me tell you something, if it all stems from Pomni having witnessed Jax befriend evil Pomni in the softball adventure, if that's where it all stemmed from, then let me ask you a very important question, Gooseworx. Why the fuck did you not use the evil big tops in this fucking episode? Think about it for a second. You have evil clones of all of the characters with all of the worst versions and worst aspects about themselves, literally embodied in the form of separate characters. And you're telling me, with such an amazing idea for an episode, for its own central theme and plot, you barely utilize those characters for character development? You know, you would think for a show that's all about character development that they would actually try to develop their characters. But yet here we have another blatant example where you have an awesome, perfect opportunity to utilize these evil versions of their characters to actually develop their characters even more by showcasing their insecurities, and yet you don't use them. You use them for like 2 minutes doing a whole lot of fuck all except making a couple of gags here and there, and that's it. What?
Oh no, the anger setting in.
Are you serious? Are you fucking for real? You wasted another awesome idea, another potential amazing episode that could have been its own standout episode, and yet here it is, wasted on a complete filler episode. And despite the fact that Gooseworx could easily make an episode all about the evil big top, he's not going to because he thinks that's filler. What are you talking about? Do you even know what the definition of filler is, dude? Like, what is your definition of filler to where you believe that would not make for a good episode? Would you guys have not loved to see more of the evil big tops, more evil Pomni, more evil Jax, more evil Ragatha, Zooble, or Coach Dictator? Like, wouldn't you not have loved to see them more in an episode, or see them actually utilized to develop the characters' stories and plots? Like, that would have been literally the whole thing that could have saved this very episode, was that fucking plot. This episode could have been saved and could have been perfected with that very plot line. Because you gotta think, right? If Caine was going to end up interfering with the adventures at some point, right? If he was going to interfere with the submission box adventures, incorporate his own ideas in the softball adventure, right? Why the fuck would he not utilize the evil big tops against the characters as a means of like testing the characters and their strengths and their abilities? That's why I said that this softball adventure was completely wasted, because you could have had a great big like softball game against these characters. Like, all these characters have to fight against their evil versions and really like test themselves and see how strong and strong-willed, strong-minded that they truly are by facing the worst aspects of themselves. And they barely even do that. Like, that's such a perfect idea right there, set in stone, that could have perfected the concept of Caine's storyline in regards to the digital circus being hell, where you would rather be living life than being trapped in the circus. Because once again, I gotta bring up the purpose of the show. The purpose of the show is to find meaning in a stagnant life. And yet here we go again with this show, once again, contradicting that very sentiment. Like, every time that we get a chance to actually enjoy stagnation in life, Caine finally decides in this episode that he's going to interfere. But his interferences mean fuck all if there's no stakes behind it. Like, oh god, no. Caine cut the stargazing adventure because he wanted to do an intermission where we get to waste 1 minute of screen time with a bunch of filler nonsense. And yet this episode's not supposed to be deemed as a filler. Okay, buddy, I'm gonna talk about that intermission in just a second, but let me get to this next beat. And then Caine cuts off the bar because all the characters were just talking to each other. He's like, yo, I'm bored. Let's get to something fun, exciting. And then we get to softball. And softball, it could be fun and exciting, but he decides to implement his own ideas. And the implementation that he decided to implement was the evil big tops. And so why we didn't use the evil big tops to solidify that the digital circus is supposed to be the representation of hell and this place fucking sucks, I don't know. But apparently, I'm still supposed to believe that life is far better than the digital circus ever could be. Like, oh man, he ruined softball. But in the way that he ruined softball, it just seems so weak, bro. It's so bland. Like, oh no. He decided that this is what a home run is, despite the fact that Gangle got an actual home run, but now we're gonna change the rules to where you can get a home run in a different way. That in and of itself is a contradiction, because why would Gangle get a home run, have that be off screen, even though that would have been perfect character development for Gangle's character? And then when Ragatha gets to have her big moment, she doesn't actually get to have a big moment because for some reason that doesn't count anymore because Caine's rules. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And I don't know. We're just wasting time, literally. The intermission. Let's talk about it now. The entire intermission is Caine just playing a bunch of music, doing a bunch of like background sets with the characters, and a couple of foreshadow moments here and there of what's to come in future episodes. That's literally it. That's literally it. The creators thought it would be a funny idea, a funny gag. Once again, here we go with the funny, because it's funny. Oh, it's a funny gag. Let's waste 1 minute of your fucking time watching an intermission that does absolutely fuck all. To the point where we even have one of our fucking characters call it out how stupid it is, and then we just go back to the show like nothing just happened. What the fuck was the point of all of that? What was the point? And I know the irony of this all is that I sound like Zooble right now, despite the fact that Zooble is my least favorite character because she offers absolutely nothing to the plot or the story.
Oh man, I had dreams and goals. I wanted to be able to leave my mark somewhere in the world. How am I supposed to just abandon that?
Hey, finally!
That's what we've been waiting for!
You know, that's even more ironic because the character that I relate to the most in the show happens to be Zooble.
Ain't that right? He ain't lying.
And it's for stuff like this. Like, dude, what are we doing? We're literally sitting around watching an intermission for no fucking reason for 1 minute straight. The character calls it out, and then we just cut back like nothing happened. What the fuck was the point? Are you telling me that the entire point of that was just to showcase, like, what? The animation styles, the music, the fucking foreshadowing moments? Dude, we could have had a million other ways we could have foreshadowed things. Like, you literally foreshadow things in the background numerous times. Even in this episode, when Pomni had to fucking cut either the blue wire or the red wire, foreshadowing her fucking hesitancy in episode 7, where she didn't know whether to press the blue button or the red button. Stuff like in episode 6, where in the background, Jax is standing behind a red wall, and that's supposed to foreshadow him pressing the red button. Like, all of this stuff. And yet, for some reason, we gotta waste a minute of your time just showcasing stuff off, because why the fuck not? It's not like we just had a conversation where Jax revealed that he used to have a friend that wasn't Ragatha, that seemingly abstracted, but now we have to showcase it to you by showcasing the door, even though we are literally going to do that in the next episode, where Jax is literally going to look at that same door in the exact same way. So what the fuck was the point of this intermission except wasting my time and making me go insane, bro? Oh my god. But wait a minute, Eric. Doesn't that reaffirm that the digital circus is actually hell? Yeah, the digital circus is hell, which makes me wonder why the fuck I'm watching it! Ugh. The digital circus is for stupid people. You're really testing me on that, huh, Gooseworx?
Wait a minute, Eric. Aren't you forgetting something? Didn't you forget to talk about Jax getting humiliated throughout the episode, finally? Doesn't that prove that Jax is not the writer's favorite and that there's no kind of favoritism within the episode?
You see, you thought I forgot about that, right? I'm guessing that's what you thought I forgot. You thought wrong.
What the fuck is this?
What the fuck? Because here's the truth of the matter. Gooseworx likes Jax wearing a maid outfit. Some people just don't work in dresses, especially males. Most males do not work in dresses. I hate to break it to you, it's just the truth of the matter. Jax does not work in a dress. I don't like it. Clearly, he's bothered by it. It was funny for the gag of like, oh man, he's humiliated by it. Gangle got him back in that way. But that's it. I could give less of a fuck. So I don't know. Apparently a lot of people like it, so they had to showcase it off in a short and like display it like, oh, look at Jax in the maid outfit. And then Gooseworx also, I believe on Halloween, posted Jax in a witch outfit wearing more feminine attired clothing, which again is just reaffirming the idea that yes, even though the character Jax in the show is being humiliated, but at what cost, right? Is it truly humiliation if the creator, if the writer actually likes what's happening to the character, right? It makes you question, right? Like to me, I feel like this is even further of an example of writer's favorite, because now Gooseworx has a clever reason to actually in story humiliate Jax's character and finally punish Jax's character reasonably, whilst also having some kind of fantasy of Jax wearing a dress constantly. I don't know, but it seems to me that that would be something that Goose would rather want to do for the character. You know, it's similar to how like Has-Been-A-Tell loves to just utilize angel dust in various different ways that makes you question how much they really care about the character.
Valentino is based on me, if you know.
Huh! But I digress. You know, when you have writer's favorite, these things, they might seem like, oh look, that proves that writer's favorite doesn't exist. No, it actually proves that it does exist, because why else would the creator do this? Why else would the creator deliberately write a story where Jax has to wear a maid dress? Well, because it works for the character. Yeah, but who wrote the fucking character, genius?
Hello? Hello? Anybody home? Hey, think.
That was a part of the gag. That was all a part of the plan. It was planned. It was pre-planned, predetermined. It was always going to happen this way. Don't you get it? Don't you get it? So no, I don't think that disproves my theory that Jax is the writer's favorite. In fact, I think that just fuels the fire even further. So no, don't think that you got one up on me. You still don't got one up on me. I'm still waiting for the comment section to showcase to me how my review of these two episodes is in any way like incorrect, because I don't see how it can. Like, I'm literally showcasing and displaying to you each of these characters individually and what gets accomplished individually throughout the episodes.
What more do you want from me?
Like, we get the funny bunny combo of Jax and Pomni being friends, all for the sake of just Pomni watching Jax talk to evil Pomni, when that could have been the entire premise of the main episode, is the evil big tops. Which I guess now brings us to the moment where I once again get to grace you with my beautiful booking skills, where I get to showcase to you how episode 5 should have been properly booked, with the actual character development stemming off of my booking of episode 4 and stemming off of the ideas that Gooseworx had introduced within this episode that went completely wasted for some reason, one reason or another. So sit back, crack a cup of joe, and enjoy the ride that I get to take you on once again. So we'll start off episode 5 with everybody returning from yet another Caine adventure. And Caine's like, welcome back everybody! I'm so glad you can all make it back. And everybody is obviously just bothered by it. But Ragatha, obviously trying to be cheerful, she tries to make a light out of it, you know, trying to cheer everybody up. It's like, it's alright everybody, you know, we made it through at the end of the day, you know. We survived another one of Caine's adventures, but you know, at this point in time, Pomni, she's just defeated. She can't listen to it anymore. And Jax, you know, kind of commentates on this after Kinger takes Ragatha away. And Jax is like, you know, that also positive Ragatha charms begin to wear off now, huh? These Caine's adventures, they fucking suck. And Zooble again criticized the adventure once again, and Caine is just, at this point, he's just tired with this. Like, you keep criticizing all these adventures, I keep making all these adventures for you. It's like, all right, that's it. Everybody get around the circle. I want to know your opinions on these next upcoming adventures that I have in mind. And everybody's obviously like, no, these adventures suck, Caine. And this is where the idea of the submission box comes back into play. And you can have Pomni or Zooble suggest it and be like, well, you know, why don't we do a submission box again? This time you actually allow us to do the submission box. And Caine is hesitant to do it because he's like, oh, I don't want to leave the NPCs running on their own. And also, I can't tell a story where nothing bad happens too. It's like, if I run these NPCs for a long period of time, like, things could start to get bad. But the characters, they're like, we just want to enjoy our own adventures for once. And so Caine is like, all right, I'll let you enjoy these adventures on one condition, and one condition only. You will have an ongoing narrative throughout each of these lightning round adventures. And obviously the characters are like, no, we don't want that. We don't want any narrative. We don't want anything like that. But Caine's like, well, I am the ringleader here. I get to make the calls, right? I get to make the adventures. So I'm going to allow you to do the lightning round. I'm going to allow you guys to go through your adventures, but I am going to have an ongoing narrative because I'm a storyteller. So I'm going to incorporate my own story in regards to your adventures. And so obviously the characters, they're not with it, but Caine's like, well, it's time to go anyway. And he kind of sends them into the adventure. And even though they're all not ready, they're all like, no, why we're doing this now? Why? And of course, you could start it off with Poacher's Paradise. Jax seems to enjoy it at first because he seems to be the one calling the shots. You know, he's like, ah, yes. So he seems to be enjoying himself in this adventure, you know, as they go on their little hunt. But obviously everybody else is like, no, we don't like this. Can we vote? And Caine's like, yes, you can vote. So obviously, you know, Jax wants to go on his adventure, but everyone's like, no, we don't really like this adventure. And then this is where you can introduce certain antagonists within the adventure. You have certain villains in here that kind of like spy in on them, and Jax kind of notices them, and he's like, who are those guys? But by this point, everyone's like, let's just skip Jax's adventure. You can do the vegan joke if you want.
Democracy sucks.
But, you know, Jax is onto something. You know, he noticed something in the distance. He noticed certain characters that are like, wait a minute, I don't recognize those people. And so we're going to skip through the Poacher's Paradise, but we established that a certain group of characters that are going to be relevant to the rest of the story. So when we move into the next one, and it's about President Pomni, and Pomni's getting the rundown of what she needs to do, this is where it's revealed that their antithesis throughout these adventures is going to be themselves, but not just themselves, the evil versions of themselves, as they are at war, and the war is against the evil big tops. And so you can have like Coach Dictator be like an actual dictator running the showbiz of what was it, New Zealand? I think is that what Jack said? It was Australia versus New Zealand, something like that. And you can have like evil Pomni, evil Ragatha, Zooble, and all them calling the shots, running things around here, around these parts. And you can have them infiltrate and plant a bomb, and they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do about the bomb. And so Pomni, you got to defuse the bomb. And so as they go to defuse the bomb, she doesn't know what wire to cut. So obviously, you know, seeing that this is yet another adventure where they have to do more crazy things, they want to skip it. But Caine reveals that they were only allowed to skip once, and so they only were able to skip one adventure, which obviously they're bothered by because that means they have to go through all these adventures now with whatever these evil big tops are, wherever these evil versions of themselves are. And so the evil versions, they infiltrate and they plant the bomb, and now Pomni has to defuse the bomb. Everyone's like, you gotta defuse the bomb, Pomni. But Pomni doesn't know which wire to cut. You know, Kinger's like, oh, I think you should cut the blue one, but she doesn't know. She starts to become hesitant, and everybody's like pressuring her. Jax is like, I don't know, do what you feel, Pomni. And then because Pomni was too hesitant and because she didn't choose a wire, the bomb blows up, and that causes them to fail their mission and go into the next adventure. I like that to be the better concept because I feel like that's better of a foreshadowing for episode 7 to have the bomb go off because Pomni failed to make a choice, which is exactly what ends up happening in episode 7. Pomni fails to make a choice under pressure, and Jax ends up choosing a choice instead, which could be metaphorically seen as the bomb, because the bomb went off when he lost control of himself and he went crazy, had a panic attack, and he just pressed a button. So I feel like that could be some good foreshadowing as they are taken into the next adventure. And the next area is going to be stargazing. So in the original episode, it was the anime and then stargazing. Here, I'm gonna have it be stargazing to have the characters kind of collect their thoughts, kind of wonder like, Pomni, why didn't you cut one of the wires? And she's like, I didn't know what to cut. Kind of reflecting on the adventure a little bit before being able to kind of like relax, because stargazing, oh, we get a chance to relax, we get a chance to just kind of like breathe a little bit and try to figure out what the hell is going on. And so you can have a couple of conversations here. You could have the little conversation with Jax and his friend and his masculinity and whatnot, his tail, all that stuff. But I feel like that'd be better saved for the bar. So I don't know, depending on whether you want it to be here or you rather it be at the bar, you can have that still be the case. But here, what I want to establish is that the characters think to themselves, if they're not allowed to skip any adventures, that means that they're going to be stuck in these adventures, right? That the characters think to themselves like, okay, what are we gonna do? And so Caine comes by, he's like, are you guys enjoying this time? It's like, why did you have to have us versus evil big tops? Well, you know, I had to make these adventures interesting, like I said, and you guys all agreed to it. And they're all like, nobody agreed to this, Caine. You just forced us into this again. And it's like, well, again, I can't leave these NPCs running for a prolonged period of time, so I need you guys to actually complete your adventures here. So you guys have to beat the big tops in order for you to get out of this adventure. That is the deal. They have to beat big tops in order to leave. So obviously they're all bothered by this because like now we have an objective where we have to actually leave the lightning round because they're going to be stuck in the lightning round, and it could cause more problems with the NPCs getting a little bit more intelligent and becoming more self-aware, and that could cause problems for Caine. So there's some stakes involved here, but you know, the characters are like, well, why don't we just stay here in stargazing where the evil big tops are not here? You know, this is kind of like our resting area. We get to enjoy ourselves. Why don't we just stay here? And Caine is like, well, because this isn't actually an adventure. No one submitted this adventure. This is actually an intermission. And you could do like a visual gag with having like the credits roll and the Digital Days music play behind Caine in reference to the end credits where they're all sitting exactly where they are in stargazing. So you could do that like meta gag, and that plays into the theme of the intermission. So instead of wasting a minute of time with a random intermission, this is the intermission. Since we never really got a confirmation of who submitted stargazing, you could use this as a perfect idea of Caine's intermission, where they're just kind of sitting here waiting for the next adventure to pop up, and this is their intermission time. And obviously the characters are like, no, but they're forced into the next adventure, and the next adventure is the anime adventure. And once again, it's another Gangle submitted adventure, which is going to cause a little bit of controversy for Jax because he knows that it's the Gangle adventure. And Zooble is like, you know, there's nothing wrong with your adventure, even though Gangle is a little bit bothered. You know, she's a little bit worried because if this adventure goes awry again, she doesn't know what to do. You know, she doesn't know if she's actually a problem, she's actually a conflict of interest. So you can establish a lot of things in this anime one. I think the anime one is the one where the most stuff can happen in regards to establishing the evil big tops. I mean, you could literally write this like an anime. Now, I don't know an anime because I don't like anime, so I couldn't tell you exactly how it could be written, but I'm sure somebody with more better anime expertise would be able to utilize the concept of good characters versus their evil counterparts in an anime setting a lot better than I could, right? Especially if it's in a school setting. I'm sure there's a lot of school melodrama you could do there for a certain period of time. But here are the pointers that I want to get introduced in this specific adventure, because this specific adventure I think is going to be very important for the upcoming adventures. So the character's objective, now they know they have to overcome their evil versions, so they have to outbeat their evil versions. So obviously the task of the matter here is that they have to figure out a way to outdo the evil big tops. Maybe it could be on like some kind of school gymnasium battle, like a team battle, 6-on-6. And also I didn't mention this, but either or, Gangle could have an evil version of Gangle here and it could still work, or it could be evil Orbs Man and she could feel left out. I think preferably I would actually have evil Gangle here because it would reestablish Gangle's conflicts from my booking of episode 4, how the mask has made her more corrupt and more egotistical and kind of like make her abuse the authority, and so now she's kind of seeing that self-reflection in the evil version of her in this adventure as well. So here in the anime adventure, I want to establish these specific things. First of all, I want to establish that Kinger knows more than he's letting on, that the coach dictator has more information about certain aspects of the circus than he lets on, and it kind of showcases that to his advantage to outmaneuver the regular big tops, aka our main characters. Another thing I want to establish is that Jax is exposed as a weeboo, that he actually is a lot more insecure as a person than he lets on, and that he has a lot more complications. And you can do this easily layup with Evil Jax. Evil Jax is a layup to exposing Jax's true character. And there's so many things you could do there in this specific anime adventure with making Jax just feel so insecure, like how Evil Jax just kind of actually likes the adventure and enjoys the adventure, which of course makes Jax feel horrible because he hates Gangle, or at least we're led to believe that he hates Gangle, but it's all just kind of like an act because he's just trying to make Gangle stay in character to being sad. And so, you know, you can have a lot of play on character development there too, especially, and you know what, I think this would also play perfectly into a vote that Gangle casts later on, like with Jax wearing the maid dress. I feel like if there ever be a point where Jax should wear the maid dress, it should be in the anime adventure. That's Gangle's adventure, whilst also dealing with the evil version of himself, because the evil version of himself is going to be all like, oh, you look great, you know, that's great outfit, and Jax is going to be like, shut the fuck up. Just so much possibility with this specific adventure. And then of course there's other things too, like you could explore a little bit of Ragatha's mommy issues in regards to evil Ragatha, kind of exposing her and her mother relationship there a little bit more. And then of course you could expose Gangle's isolation being intensified more with Jax, of course, bullying and being more pissed off with Gangle in this adventure. And of course Gangle kind of seeing the evil version of herself and feeling like she is responsible for all the characters just being in constant pain, which eventually I think will cost them this adventure and cause them to fail in the anime adventure again. But before I get to that, you know, we gotta talk about the other two. Zooble, you can have more on display with her body dysmorphia and also in regards to her intelligence. And Caine, once again, insulting her intelligence by making her seem stupid, and you can play on a lot of themes there. You can play on Pomni, dealing with evil Pomni, and how evil Pomni kind of like treats her like a kid, treats her like a child, and Pomni feels like she needs to stand up for herself. So that way, when they all fail this anime adventure and they go into the bar, everybody at this point in time, you know, they kind of got a little bit of exposure. Everybody's got their own insecurities got exposed in 4K in the anime adventure. And now they all are kind of like looking at each other like, what the hell do we do? How are we gonna overcome this? And this is where you can have the bar scene and can have the characters begin to actually spill a little bit about their past and spill a little bit about their conflicts, because now you actually have a setup that leads them to have a natural conversation where they would talk about this stuff, rather than the actual episode 5 where they just decide to talk about their past for just no reason, no setup, and no point. Here, there is a point, and the point is to figure out how the hell they're going to beat the evil big tops. In order for them to beat the evil big tops, they have to learn how to overcome their own issues personally, and that's of course going to be an issue for them because they don't know how to do that. You know, you can have Ragatha try to remain as the positive figure here, but the characters finally are beginning to call her out, and since this is her based episode, can be very vital to the remaining factor. Like, everyone's trying to be positive, but they're fighting the worst versions of themselves. They're fighting all of their insecurities face on. And so, like, even though Ragatha's trying to keep everybody in a positive mood, they're all like, Ragatha, no, not everything is going to work with just saying that everything is just going to be positive. And this is what could cause Ragatha to finally open up about her mother a bit more, and about how she feels like she needs to be helping these characters a bit more, how she needs to be more positive with them and around them, and just kind of be like helping them as much as she can so that they don't ever feel like they are alone in this, and they don't feel like that the negativity can consume them. And you could have more things in the bar here, like how Kinger seemingly knows more than he lets on, but because he's not fully there mentally, even though the characters are going to question Kinger, they're not going to really get much answers because Kinger is not going to really know in full totality because he has memory loss. And then you could also have like Pomni beginning to like take a little bit of a leadership in Kinger's mental absence, where Pomni is now like, she doesn't want to be treated like a kid, so she finally stands up for herself. She'd be like, she's taking that leader role, being like, everybody's got to get to it, you know, everybody's got to own up to what their biggest flaws are in order for us to overcome this. And this is how you can start the friendship between Jax and Pomni, because Pomni is the only one that could really call Jax out on this, and now Jax is just constantly trying to deflect all of his insecurities, all of his problems, all of his fears. Pomni can finally like stand up to him and be like, yo, Jax, we need to do this. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck here for who knows how long. We're going to be stuck in these adventures where we're going to constantly be fighting ourselves. Like, we have to overcome ourselves in order to get out of here. And so now everyone's kind of like in a more serious tone. Everyone's kind of like, all right, we need to work together. They need to work together to overcome this. And that will lead us straight into the softball adventure. And the softball adventure can be a perfect grounds for a finale of this rivalry. You know, you have the big tops versus the evil big tops in a softball adventure. And here you can have Ragatha finally begin to showcase her expertise and her passions and hobbies, with her trying to teach everybody how to play softball and be like, all right, this is what you guys do and this is how we could win this, you know? And Pomni obviously is all for it because she's taking more of the leadership role now. And so this is it. This is the game where they're all going to have to outdo each other. And so this is where each of them, you can have moments throughout this adventure where each of them overcome one of their insecurities. And the reason why I'm being more vague about this episode's booking is because in totality, we don't know in full context all of these characters' true complications and backstories, because episode 8 and 9 are still not out yet. So obviously I'm leaving this a bit more vague. I'm sure when those episodes drop, I will know how to book this a bit more concrete, and then hopefully it will flow a lot better in terms of booking. But here, you know, you can have certain things with the characters overcoming themselves, like for example, Jax learning how to face humiliation head on without letting it get to him too much. You can have Zooble overcoming Zooble, even though Zooble's way of overcoming Zooble is just throwing a softball directly into her face, which then causes a little bit of a penalty, but that's fine because that means that evil Pomni is going to take the pitching role. And I think evil Pomni being the pitcher for the remainder of the game is going to be very crucial, because evil Pomni is the main villain of the crew. Out of the whole evil crew, evil Pomni is the main villain because she is the one who took initiative as a leader before regular Pomni, because it's the opposite of herself. But sometimes channeling into that worst version of yourself can allow you to understand your flaws to overcome those problems about you. And I think that would be very important here in regards to the characters and each of their growth, specifically Pomni. And now I believe all of this at some point, it's going to come down to Gangle. I don't know exactly what specific events are going to lead to Gangle being the one that has to score for them, that has to score for their team, but it could be like a constant thing where Ragatha and Pomni are trying to motivate Gangle, but Gangle is still kind of in that depressed state, still kind of insecure, still not knowing if she can actually do it, and Jax is still kind of being a little bit of a nuisance, which at some point actually causes Ragatha to fumble, where she actually messes up her game, and that obviously gives the evil big tops an advantage. So now Gangle is like almost the last hope, and so Zooble is like trying to convince Gangle, like trying to cheer on, like Zooble believes in Gangle, that Gangle can do this if she just believes in herself. And you could even have the scene from episode 6 here in this episode where Zooble tells her that she doesn't need to have the mask in order to be her, and it could be this great moment where Gangle goes up to the plate. Gangle has this big opportunity to score, and then she does, and you have Jax, you know, having his doubts, like, oh man, we're putting our faith in Gangle, we're gonna lose. And Ragatha could blow up, and Pomni could be like, oh, chill, and Ragatha be like, well, you're the one who said it's all right to be negative sometimes. And so now it's just all down to Gangle, and Gangle scores the fucking home run, and everybody's cheering. Everybody's like, you did it, Gangle, we could go back to the circus, we won, we beat the evil big tops. That is a big celebration. Gangle's obviously so thankful for Ragatha for teaching her, and it's just this big moment. And then Caine comes into the frame, and Caine says, wait a minute, hold on, wait just a minute now. And he says that Gangle didn't actually get a home run because according to his interpretation of softball, that's not how you get a home run. But Ragatha tries to explain to Caine that no, you're thinking of the wrong sport. This is softball, not baseball. You can have like a rule here that's something in regards to the difference of softball and baseball, and that something went wrong. Because, you know, after all, Caine is an AI, and so he's only allowed to interpret whatever he is getting information from. So he is getting confused in regards to the softball, and so that's causing like him to have a little bit of argument with Ragatha. Ragatha's trying to explain like, no, Gangle scored, that was allowed, that was legal, but Caine's like, not according to what I know. And so he removes the score from Gangle, and obviously it's just this big defeating moment because Gangle just feels like she just got blue balled, and she just feels so down in the dumps, and obviously she's a little hurt by letting letting Ragatha down. You know, she kind of thinks that Ragatha led her a little bit of astray. Like, Ragatha didn't know completely what she was talking about. Like, Gangle doesn't know whether Ragatha was getting the sport confused or if Caine was getting the sport confused. But, you know, in this situation, you can have it go either way. You can have it be like Gangle either feels like she let Ragatha down, or she feels like Ragatha let her down by confusing the sport, and that Caine may know more than Ragatha, even though in reality, Ragatha does know what she's talking about. It's just that Caine got the sport confused, and it could be this whole thing. And everybody's kind of now like, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna get out of here? And, you know, obviously Jax, he finds it funny that like Gangle really thought she did something, and so he's laughing about it, but obviously everyone's like, yo, chill out, Jax. Pomni goes to Jax like, yo, Gangle did get it for us, but, you know, now we have to deal with whatever Caine is stating. And so you can have like Ragatha feeling frustrated by this, be the one to step up to the plate and get her redemption from earlier, her pitch from earlier. Now Ragatha goes up to the plate and she is gonna bring everybody home, and Ragatha plays it the way that Caine claims that you have to play it, and she scores, and she gets a home run too, and she manages to get everybody home. But by this point, the excitement that they got from Gangle is just not the same. It doesn't hit the same, and they don't seemingly feel as enthusiastic to leave as they had before, which of course bothers Ragatha a little bit, because Ragatha felt like, well, I just won the game for us, you know, I just got us out of here. But they feel like it doesn't matter if they got out of there, because Caine still ruined the moment. And so Zooble goes to 10 to Gangle, and Zooble, now this time Zooble offers Gangle, you want to draw something, and this time, now having more faith in Zooble specifically, now you could have the scene where Gangle takes up on Zooble's offer, like from the original episode 4, and then they go off and they could go draw together and make some drawings and some paintings. You could have Jax, of course, wandering off on his own, being bothered by the way everything transpired, just like he did in my prior booking of episode 4. But this time, Pomni goes over to Jax and, you know, goes to try and talk with Jax and try to comfort him after knowing and learning about his problems and insecurities. And so Pomni goes after Jax, and Ragatha, of course, sees this, and she's like, what is Pomni doing? Why is Pomni going to Jax for support? And then, you know, Kinger is obviously the only person that would probably be thankful for Ragatha. You know, he could do the whole spinning her around like a child thing. But the reason why Ragatha is not as excited or as enthusiastic with Kinger being the one to kind of like support it is because she thinks that Kinger is not mentally there. And so the one character that's not mentally all the way there is the only one that can truly like feel appreciative for what Ragatha was willing to do, which Ragatha was willing to play against her knowledge and her rules of softball in order to get them all out. And this of course could lead into like complications with her and going into episode 6, where she starts to feel like Pomni's choosing Jax over her because Pomni may have not have liked the softball adventure, and because everyone feels like Ragatha led them a little bit astray in regards to how you actually play the game, not knowing if what Caine is saying is true or if what Ragatha is saying is true. So they're kind of like on the fence, like, yeah, Caine's a known liar, but also like we're not really into the sport that much to know how it actually is supposed to be played. So we don't know what transpired there between them, and I think that that's really good to have Ragatha seem like she's isolated without having to forcefully find a way to truly try to isolate her. Like, she feels isolated even though she is not isolated, and it still works here because nobody's really appreciative of what she was able to accomplish. And that could be very reflective in later episodes like episode 8 and 9, where if Ragatha does something to help the crew and if they're not as appreciative of, that could cause some conflicts. But I don't know, it all depends on the future of that. But I really want to emphasize here that Ragatha is not just some kind of weirdo who's just obsessed with Pomni for some reason, but here she actually has reason to feel doubt in Pomni, because the first thing that Pomni did when going back to the circus was immediately going to comfort Jax out of everybody there. Instead of like comforting Gangle, which Zooble does instead, she goes to comfort Jax, and she kind of feels like that's very uncharacteristic considering what Jax put them through in this adventure. Once again, Jax was a nuisance in this adventure and was constantly a conflict. And I think that's what makes the relationship between Pomni and Jax going into episode 6 far more interesting, because now, you know, Pomni's going over to confront Jax because she saw him alone in my previous booking of episode 4, and now here in my booking episode 5, after learning more about Jax and more about his complications and his personal problems, she wants to make sure that Jax feels included, just like what Kinger's advice has always been, you know, make sure that everyone feels like they belong. And so she goes to Jax trying to make him feel like he belongs and tries to be like, you know, you don't have to split off from everybody just because of whatever your issues are. Just make sure that you are just not always a nuisance to people. It's like, why do you always care about that stuff, Pom? And you can have like a little fun banter between the two that stems off of what they interacted with in regards to their evil versions, whether that be in the anime adventure or whether that have been in the softball one. There's a lot of room to work with in regards to how that all transpires and how this friendship between Pomni and Jax feels a lot more impactful and a lot stronger going into episode 6, because now it feels like a genuine friendship rather than just some forced together pairing just for the sake of everybody likes these two together. You know what I mean? So it all works out in the end, and I think this would have been far better of a 5th episode, establishing far more of the characters' developments leading into episode 6. And yes, even though I left out some things or I changed some things around, the way that episode 6 would have played out would have been pretty much the same in my vision, in my eyes. But obviously, instead of having that scene with Zooble and Gangle in that episode, I would have it here and then replace the story with Zooble and Gangle in episode 6 and focus it more towards the bullying of Jax and how Zooble feels the need to stand up for Gangle and provide help for Gangle whenever she needs to. And in order to do that, she has to overcome her own personal insecurities about her own self-image, which will be very important in regards to the actual gun game where she has to like try and gun Jax down. And then of course the mannequin stuff, instead of having the mannequin here in episode 5, you can tease it in episode 6 where they're actually in the house, where it would actually make sense for that mannequin to be teased. You could show the mannequin like in the background sneaking around while they're shooting each other out and kind of like spying in on them to tease the next episode, which would have been episode 7. But you know, that's how I would have personally booked episode 5 in totality, utilizing what I got from episode 5 and everything in regards to what I think could have been done in episode 5. And that's a wrap on the worst episodes of the Amazing Digital Circus. I do apologize if I ruined the experience of these 2 episodes for you. I'm just very passionate about stories, and I recognize its flaws very easily, especially in circumstances like this. I'm not saying that a story is not allowed to have flaws. Sometimes a flaws in a story can make it more enjoyable. Like I said earlier, Total Drama Island is one of my favorite shows of all time, despite its flaws, because of how entertaining and how enjoyable it is to watch. But when those flaws are actively going out of its way to ruin the story and ruin the experience that is the character development that's allegedly supposed to be there, according to the show creator, well, then there's your problem now, isn't it? Especially when the creator goes out of his way to state that he's not willing to make more episodes of the Digital Circus because he believes them to be filler, despite these very 2 episodes being the pure definition of filler with very minimal, non-existent, or horrible character development that could have easily been nixed altogether or completely rewritten to actually be meaningful in much various different ways that he introduced. He introduced all these different storylines and plot lines and yet completely overlooked them in these 2 specific episodes. I don't know why he did, I don't know how he did, but it seems like a very big oversight in my opinion, how you completely have one purpose for the show, which is to find meaning in a stagnant life, and yet completely miss that purpose in an entire episode where you focus instead on how horrible stagnant life actually is, and then it's supposed to lead me to believe that the Digital Circus is any worse than the real world. If I watched episode 4 with the complete mentality of actually taking something away from the show, if it wasn't for the fact that the show creator just trying to insult my intelligence by saying that the show is made for dumb people, well then I would have just felt like my life sucked even more. Like I said earlier, I would have felt more inclined to kill myself rather than actually live my life, because that's what episode 4 is implying. Episode 4 is implying that it's much better to be in the Digital Circus than to actually live in the real world. I mean, that's why you have Gangle running into oncoming traffic after working a 9-to-5 job, right? That's entirely the takeaway of that story, right? Even though it didn't have to be, because you could have actually focused on the story actually showcasing that there is good in stagnant life, that there is meaning in something as meaningless as a job, but I digress. And then in the case of episode 5, when you have the opportunity to actually make entertaining, fun character development episodes, you fail to do that and instead make boring filler, and somehow I'm supposed to overlook the idea of you making another season where it could actually do that very thing, go on various different adventures, and showcase the circus circus in various different lights that could actually make it far more investing. Like what happened during the ship in the thunderstorm adventure that they went on at the beginning of the episode. I feel like that could have been very interesting and very intriguing had they actually explored that in some way, shape, or form. But we never got that exploration, so who the fuck knows? Here's what I know. Digital Circus better end on a high note, because if episode 8 and episode 9 ruin the story in any way and completely fumble the bag of what this show is all about, best believe I'm gonna be back once again to rip this show's ass anew. Because as always, I'm here to deliver the facts. And as a matter of fact, let's face the facts. I'm here to give you a reality check, and if you can't handle that, I might as well beat you with a baseball bat. Best believe. And I swear to you, if the big revelation of the end of this entire show is that Bubble is supposed to be the one controlling the entire circus because it's supposed to be Gooseworx, and it's supposed to be metaphorical because Gooseworx created an entire show that was completely actually meaningless and was just a cash grab just to get people invested and interested in the circus, and that this entire operation was to showcase how AI is farming you by making you invest in things that is just slop. If that's the metaphor of this entire show, and I just wasted my time watching this show just to feed them money, and it was never gonna amount to anything at all, I swear to you, the rant that you will hear in my review will be legendary. Arrivederci, you bitch ass motherfuckers.
You serious?